Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've never really shared this with anyone outside my immediate family, and even then, I downplayed what happened. It's been over 20 years now, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I know how this sounds, but I swear every word is true. Back in spring of 2002, I was home from college for a weekend to help my parents clean out their garage. They lived on this big piece of land outside Ellensburg, Washington, about 15 acres with woods on one side and open fields on the other. The property had an old abandoned barn and farmhouse from when it used to be a working farm decades ago. My best friend Jake came along to help. We'd been tight since elementary school, and he was always down to lend a hand. Jake was this really practical, no-nonsense guy, the kind who doesn't get spooked easily and always has a logical explanation for everything. That's important to understand for later. We spent most of the day hauling junk out of my parents' garage. My dad had this old Ford tractor with a wagon attachment that we were using to cart stuff over to our burn pile. The pile was maybe 200 yards from the main house, right at the edge where our property met the woods. It was this perfect spot for burning trash because it was far enough from any structures but still on cleared land. By late afternoon, we'd filled the wagon with all sorts of crap. Old cardboard boxes, broken furniture, dead branches that had fallen during winter storms. My mom had made us sandwiches, and we wolfed them down before heading out to the burn pile with our first load. The weather was typical for spring in that part of Washington, cool but not cold, overcast but not raining. The sun was starting to get low, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock. I remember being annoyed because I wanted to finish before dark. Jake and I unloaded the wagon at the burn pile. I had brought lighter fluid and some newspaper to get it started. Once we had a decent fire going, I told Jake I'd head back to grab another load while he stayed and watched the fire to make sure it didn't spread. The grass was still pretty damp from spring, but you can never be too careful. "No problem," he said. "I'll keep an eye on it." I drove the tractor back to the house and spent maybe 20 or 30 minutes loading up more junk. My dad helped this time, and we chatted about school and stuff. Just normal conversation. I had no idea what was about to happen. When I got back to the burn pile, the first thing I noticed was Jake standing way closer to the fire than he should have been, like uncomfortably close. The flames were pretty high by this point, and he was just staring into them. "Hey man, you're gonna singe your eyebrows standing that close," I called out as I approached. He didn't laugh or even turn around. He just kept staring at the fire. I parked the tractor a safe distance away and walked over. "You okay?" Jake finally looked at me, and I immediately knew something was wrong. His face was pale, and he had this tight, anxious expression I'd never seen on him before. "Listen," he said quietly, almost whispering. "Do you hear that?" I stopped and listened. At first, all I could hear was the crackling of the fire, but then I caught it, something moving in the woods beyond the burn pile. Heavy movement, not like a squirrel or even a deer. This was big. "Probably just an elk or something," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew that wasn't right. The sound was deliberate, like something circling our fire just beyond the reach of the light. "It's been doing that for 15 minutes, Jake said. "Getting closer, then backing off. I thought it was just branches falling at first, but it's moving." We both stood there listening. The fire popped and hissed, sending sparks into the darkening sky. And then we heard it, a loud crack from the edge of the woods, maybe 30 yards away. Not a twig breaking, but the sound of something substantial, like a whole branch being torn from a tree. "What the fuck was that?" Jake whispered. Before I could answer, another crack came from a different direction, further to our right. Then another from behind us. Whatever it was, It was circling us, and there seemed to be more than one. "Let's build up the fire," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Make it bigger." We started grabbing branches and debris from our pile and throwing them onto the flames. The fire grew, pushing back the darkness a little more. But so did the sounds around us. More cracking, more movement, and now what sounded unmistakably like footsteps. Heavy footsteps moving too fast for a human, and definitely too heavy. "We should go," Jake said, his voice cracking slightly. I nodded, but for some reason I felt frozen in place. There was something primal about the situation, like we were early humans huddled around a fire while predators stalked just beyond the light. My instincts were screaming to stay by the fire, that stepping into the darkness would be worse. And then I saw it. Just for a second, but clear enough that I'll never forget it. At the edge of the woods, where our firelight barely reached, something moved. Something big. It was tall, at least 7 or 8 feet, with broad shoulders and a dark silhouette that didn't look quite right. It moved with this unnatural quickness, stepping from behind one tree to another, but in that brief moment when it was exposed, I saw it. "Jake," I whispered, my mouth gone completely dry. "I saw it too," he said, his voice barely audible. The cracking sounds intensified. Now it sounded like entire limbs were being torn from trees. The distinct sound of wood splintering under tremendous force. And the footsteps were getting faster, circling our little island of light like they were building up to something. That's when Jake snapped out of it before I did. He grabbed a pitchfork we'd brought to manage the burn pile and held it out in front of him like a weapon. "We're leaving. Now," he said, already backing toward the tractor. "Don't run, just walk. Keep your eyes on the woods." I nodded, unable to form words. We backed toward the tractor, the sounds from the woods growing more frantic, more aggressive. It felt like whatever was out there was angry that we were leaving, like it had been trying to intimidate us away from its territory and was frustrated that we weren't properly terrified. But we were. God, we were. We reached the tractor, and I climbed up to the seat with shaking hands. Jake stood on the hitch with one hand on my shoulder, the other still gripping the pitchfork. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, unnaturally loud in the quiet dusk. As I put it in gear, something large moved at the edge of our vision, darting between trees with that same unnatural speed. Then another movement from a different direction. They were converging. "Go! Go!" Jake shouted, and I gunned it. The old tractor wasn't built for speed, but I pushed it as hard as I could. We rumbled away from the burn pile, the wagon bouncing empty behind us. I kept my eyes fixed on the path ahead, but Jake was watching behind us. "Jesus Christ," he kept saying under his breath. "Jesus Christ." I didn't ask what he saw. I didn't want to know. It took maybe 2 minutes to reach the house, the longest 2 minutes of my life. As soon as we pulled up to the garage, my dad came out on the porch. "Everything okay?" he called. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost." Jake and I exchanged glances. What could we say? That we'd been stalked by something impossible? That we'd heard sounds no animal should be able to make? "Thought we saw a bear," I said finally. "Got spooked." My dad frowned. "There aren't any bears around here this time of year." "Must have been something else then," I mumbled. We didn't go back to the burn pile that night. My dad was annoyed that we'd left the fire unattended, but he must have seen how shaken we were, because he didn't push it. He drove the tractor back himself to check on it, while Jake and I stayed at the house. When my dad returned 20 minutes later, he seemed perfectly calm. "Fire's almost out on its own," he said. "Didn't see any bears, though." Jake stayed overnight, neither of us wanting to talk about what had happened. The next morning, in the safety of daylight, we walked back to the burn pile together. The fire was completely out, just ashes and charred wood remaining, and all around the perimeter, maybe 30 feet back from where we'd been standing, were broken branches. Not just twigs, but substantial limbs, some as thick as my arm, snapped clean off trees. They formed an almost perfect circle around where we'd been. Jake picked one up, examining the break. "This wasn't torn off by an animal," he said quietly. "Look at how clean this break is. It's like it was snapped." We didn't stay long after that. Jake had to get back to campus, and I made up some excuse about homework to leave early too. Neither of us wanted to spend another night there. Years later, after my dad passed away, I actually bought the property from my mom when she decided to downsize. I've fixed up the house, cleared more land, even renovated part of the old barn. But I've never used that burn pile again. I built a new one closer to the house. Sometimes on quiet nights when the wind is still, I swear I can hear cracking sounds from the edge of the woods, and no matter how many logical explanations I come up with, falling branches, settling trees, normal forest sounds, I can't shake the feeling that something is still out there, watching and waiting for me to venture too far from the safety of my lights. Whatever it was that night, whatever powerful entity we encountered, it made its point. That part of my property belongs to it, not me, and to this day I respect that boundary. Story 2. I still get chills thinking about what happened last Halloween. My husband Ethan and I had just closed on our dream farmhouse. 5 acres of land, an old but beautiful 2-story home, and the privacy we'd been craving after years of living in apartments with paper-thin walls. We were so damn excited to get away from the city. No more traffic noise, no more neighbors fighting at 3 in the morning, no more feeling trapped in a concrete jungle. The day we got the keys was perfect. Clear skies, that crisp fall air that makes you feel alive. We'd scheduled the movers for the next day, so we packed our SUV with just the essentials: sleeping bags, some clothes, basic toiletries, and enough food to get us through the night. We figured we'd camp out in the living room, maybe light a fire in the fireplace, and celebrate our first night as homeowners. But something felt off the moment we turned onto our long gravel driveway. It stretches about a quarter-mile through woods before opening up to the clearing where our house sits. I remember telling Ethan, "Does it feel like we're being watched?" He laughed it off, said it was just my city girl nerves adjusting to country life. Maybe he was right. The realtor met us there to hand over the keys. I noticed how she kept checking her watch, rushing through the final walkthrough. When I asked if everything was okay, she mumbled something about needing to get back to town before dark. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, I wish I'd paid more attention. That evening, we spread our sleeping bags in front of the fireplace. The house was empty, except for an old rocking chair the previous owner had left behind. Ethan got a nice fire going, and we toasted to our new beginning with cheap champagne in plastic cups. The whole house creaked and settled around us, but that's normal for old farmhouses, right? We fell asleep around 11, exhausted from the move and excited for the movers to arrive the next morning with all our stuff. I don't know what time it was when Ethan shook me awake. His face looked pale in the dying firelight. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, we both heard it. A loud crash from upstairs in what would be our master bedroom. It sounded like glass shattering, followed by something heavy hitting the floor. "Stay here," Ethan said, grabbing the fireplace poker. I ignored him and followed close behind, my phone's flashlight illuminating the unfamiliar hallway and stairs. The bedroom door was open, and a freezing draft hit us as soon as we stepped inside. The window, a big double-paned one overlooking the backyard, was completely shattered. Glass covered the hardwood floor, and in the middle of it all was a rock the size of a basketball. Not just any rock, this was a boulder that would have taken serious strength to lift, let alone throw. "Who the hell could throw something that big?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "We're on the 2nd floor." Ethan moved carefully to the window, avoiding the glass. "Holy shit," he muttered. "Cat, it's snowing." I joined him at the window. Sure enough, heavy snow was falling, coating everything in white. This made no sense. The forecast had promised clear skies for our moving day. There were no vehicles or footprints visible in the newly fallen snow. How could anyone have gotten close enough to throw something through our window without leaving a trace? We spent the rest of the night huddled together in our sleeping bags, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. When morning came, the snow had stopped, leaving about 3 inches on the ground. The movers called to say they couldn't make it until the roads cleared, maybe tomorrow. That second night was when things got truly terrifying. The snow started again around sunset, heavier this time. By 8 o'clock we were in the middle of a full-blown blizzard. The power flickered, then went out completely. We lit candles and built up the fire, trying to stay warm. Neither of us mentioned what had happened the night before, like we were afraid speaking about it would make it real. We were sitting in silence when we heard it. A howl from the woods. Not a wolf or coyote howl. Though at first I tried to convince myself that's what it was. This was different, lower, more guttural, but somehow also human-like. It made the hair on my arms stand up. Probably just the wind, Ethan said, but I could tell he didn't believe it. The howl came again, closer this time. Then another joined it from a different direction, and another. They were moving, circling the house. "Ethan," I whispered, gripping his arm, "what is that?" Before he could answer, the howling changed. It became a deep, rumbling growl mixed with what sounded like words. Not English, not any language I recognized, but definitely purposeful communication. And it was coming from right outside our back door. We froze, hardly daring to breathe. The growling continued, joined by a thumping sound against the door. Not knocking, more like something heavy repeatedly bumping against it. Ethan stood up, still holding the fireplace poker from the night before. I grabbed his arm, silently begging him not to investigate, but he gently pulled away. I followed, my heart pounding so hard I was sure whatever was outside could hear it. We were halfway to the kitchen when another crash came from upstairs, another window breaking. The growling outside stopped abruptly, then the howling started again, further away this time. I don't know what possessed me, but I moved to the living room window and peered out into the darkness. The snow was falling so heavily that visibility was limited to maybe 15 feet. But in that small circle of visibility, illuminated by the faint glow from our fireplace, I saw movement. Dark shapes moving between the trees at the edge of our property, and eyes, several pairs of yellowish reflective eyes watching the house. "Ethan," I choked out, "there's something out there, multiple somethings." He joined me at the window and I heard his breath catch. "What the fuck are those?" he whispered. For hours, we sat with our backs against the wall beneath the window, listening to the creatures move around our property. Sometimes they'd come close enough that we could hear their breathing, deep, heavy breaths that didn't sound entirely animal. Other times, they'd retreat to the woods, their howls becoming distant before approaching again. Around 3 in the morning, we heard heavy footsteps on the roof. The whole house seemed to shake with each impact. It wasn't random movement. It felt deliberate, like whatever was up there was trying to find a way in. Neither of us slept. When dawn finally broke, the howling stopped. The snow had piled up to almost 2 feet overnight. Ethan insisted on checking the property while I called the power company. When he came back inside 20 minutes later, his face was ashen. "You need to see this," he said, voice trembling. I followed him outside, wrapped in every layer I could find. He led me to the edge of the woods, where the snow was disturbed. At first I thought maybe deer had passed through, but as I got closer I realized what I was looking at. Footprints. Massive footprints, at least 16 inches long and half that wide. They weren't animal prints. They were clearly bipedal, with 5 distinct toes. But the strangest part was the periodic impressions beside them, like knuckle drags, as if whatever made them occasionally drop to all fours. We followed the tracks to where they disappeared deeper into the woods. Neither of us was brave enough to follow further. The power came back on that afternoon, and the movers finally arrived the next day. We didn't tell them about what happened. How could we without sounding insane? We replaced the broken windows and tried to convince ourselves there was a logical explanation. A week passed without incident. We started meeting neighbors, people who lived miles down the road but were technically the closest houses to ours. During a dinner with an older couple, Tom and Mary, the conversation turned to local legends. "You folks heard about the Sasquatch around these parts?" Tom asked casually, like he was asking if we'd tried the local diner. Ethan and I exchanged glances. "What's Sasquatch?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mary rolled her eyes. Tom loves scaring the newcomers with those old stories. But Tom wasn't smiling. "Your place," he said, looking at us intently. "The old Wilson farm. Did the realtor tell you why Wilson sold it so cheap?" We shook our heads. Wilson lived there for 30 years. Last 5 or so, he reported all kinds of strange happenings. Creatures damaging his trees, hitting the house with sticks and rocks, jumping on his roof. Nobody believed him, of course. They found him dead of a heart attack last winter. My blood ran cold. "When last winter?" I managed to ask. "First big snow," Tom replied. "November 1st. Halloween night, exactly 1 year before we moved in. Over the next few months, we learned to live with our situation. The creatures only seemed to come during snowfall. We never got a clear look at them, just glimpses of dark, massive shapes moving with surprising speed and agility. One night in December, after another rock came through a window, despite our new reinforced glass, I did something impulsive. I put a plate of food, leftover stew and bread on the back porch. By morning, the plate was empty and placed neatly by the door. It became a strange sort of peace treaty. During snowstorms, we'd leave food out. The creatures would still move around the property, sometimes howl and make those strange communicative sounds, but they stopped throwing rocks or jumping on the roof. Sometimes, when I look out during heavy snowfall, I see those yellow eyes watching from the tree line. I don't feel afraid anymore. Just a weird sense of coexistence with something I can't explain. We've never told anyone else the full story. How do you explain that you're essentially feeding Bigfoot during snowstorms? That your property is visited by creatures straight out of a cryptid documentary? I still don't know what they are or why they're here. I don't know why they only come in the snow or why they targeted our house. All I know is that on Halloween night, when the first snow fell unexpectedly, something in those woods woke up and decided to let us know we weren't alone. And I guess we're okay with that now, as long as they stay outside where they belong. Story 3. I've been debating whether to share this for years. I'm not looking for attention or trying to convince anyone of anything. I just need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. This happened in the summer of '81. I was 19 then, and my boyfriend Jason and I were visiting some friends near Randall, Washington. It's a tiny place nestled against the mountains with more trees than people. Jason and I had been dating for about a year at that point. We were staying with our friends Mark and Sarah for a couple weeks during summer break. That night started like any other. We'd been barbecuing at Mark's parents' place, drinking a few beers, nothing crazy, and just enjoying the summer evening. Around 10 o'clock, Mark suggested we go for a drive. It was something we did often, just cruising around, listening to music with the windows down. The night was warm, but not hot, and the sky was incredibly clear. Mark knew all these back roads that wound through the forests near the Dark Divide region. If you're not familiar with it, it's this massive undeveloped area of dense forest between Mount St. Helens and Mount Adams. Beautiful but isolated. Really isolated. We piled into Mark's old Chevy Impala, Mark and Sarah in front, Jason and I in back. We drove maybe 20 minutes out of town, just talking and laughing. The roads got narrower and darker, but Mark knew them well. Eventually, he turned onto this unmarked dirt road that cut deeper into the forest. The trees were massive pines that blocked out what little moonlight there was. Mark's headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness. About a mile down this road, Mark pulled over into a small clearing. He'd brought us to this spot before. It was nothing special, just a widened area where the trees pulled back a bit. You could see the stars through the gap in the canopy. Mark turned the car around so we were facing back toward the forest, engine still running, headlights on. We sat there talking about nothing important, classes for the fall, some movie we'd seen. Sarah was telling a story about her summer job when Jason suddenly grabbed my arm. His grip was so tight it actually hurt. "What's that?" he said, pointing toward the tree line about 30 feet ahead of us. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed what had caught his attention. 2 glowing points reflecting our headlights from within the trees. They were yellowish-green, like when a cat's eyes catch the light, but much larger. Mark leaned forward over the steering wheel. Probably just a deer. "Too high for a deer," Sarah said quietly. She was right. Whatever those reflections were, they had to be at least 6 or 7 feet off the ground. The 4 of us fell completely silent, just staring at those 2 glowing points in the darkness. "Maybe it's a bear," I suggested, though I knew bear eyeshine usually appears red in headlights, not green. "Standing on its hind legs, maybe," Mark said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Could be an owl on a branch," Sarah offered. Jason shook his head. "Those eyes are too far apart for an owl, and they're not moving like a bird would." He was right. The eyes remained perfectly still, unblinking, just watching us. I remember feeling a strange heaviness in my chest, like the air had suddenly become too thick to breathe properly. "Flip on the high beams," Jason said. When Mark hit the high beams, I wish I could say the mystery was solved, that we saw a bear or a deer or even a person playing a prank. But what we saw instead has haunted me for over 40 years. Standing just inside the tree line was something massive. It was hard to make out details because it was so dark, but I could clearly see a solid shape standing completely upright. It wasn't hunched over like a bear would be. It was just standing there, watching us. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, much wider than any human I've ever seen. Its overall shape was vaguely human-like, but all wrong, too big, too solid. I couldn't make out facial features beyond those reflective eyes, but I could see that its body was covered in what looked like dark fur or hair. I'll never forget what happened next. With absolutely no sense of alarm or hurry, the thing turned slowly to its left. As it moved, I could see its full profile against the slightly lighter background of the forest. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. Then it simply walked deeper into the trees, taking long, even strides, disappearing into the darkness. The movement wasn't like anything I'd ever seen, not like a person in a costume, not like any animal. It moved with this strange confidence, purpose. I don't know how to describe it, like it was completely in its element, and we were the ones who didn't belong. For a few seconds, we all just sat there frozen. Then Sarah started crying, and Mark slammed the car into reverse, spinning us around so fast I thought we might flip. He floored it back down that dirt road, bouncing us around so hard I bit my tongue. Nobody spoke until we hit the main road. Then everyone started talking at once. "What the fuck was that?" Mark kept saying. "It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a bear," Sarah repeated, almost like a chant. Jason was eerily quiet, just staring out the window with his hand clutching mine so tight my fingers went numb. When we got back to Mark's house, we sat in his kitchen trying to make sense of what we'd seen. We all described the same thing: the height, the broad shoulders, the way it moved. None of us could come up with a rational explanation. "Maybe it was a guy in a costume," Mark suggested, but his voice was hollow. "In the middle of nowhere? At night? For what purpose?" Sarah countered. We debated telling someone, forest rangers, police, someone, but who would believe us? 4 kids who'd had a few beers, seeing monsters in the woods? We'd be laughed out of town. So we made a pact to keep it between us. But I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes staring back at me. Not aggressive, not threatening, just watching. Somehow that was worse. The next day, we did something that probably wasn't smart. We went back. In daylight, with all four of us, we convinced ourselves it would be safe. We needed to see the place again, to reassure ourselves that there was a logical explanation. The clearing looked completely ordinary in the daylight. There were no massive footprints, no broken branches, nothing to suggest something huge had passed through. But there was one thing. A large patch of tall, wild grass near where we'd seen the figure was completely dried out in a perfect circle, maybe 15 feet across. It wasn't burned or trampled, just dead. Completely drained of color, like all the moisture and life had been sucked out of it. The circle was so perfect it looked artificial, but there was no sign anyone had been there to create it. We didn't stay long. Something about that place felt wrong, even in broad daylight. Life went on. Jason and I eventually got married. Sarah and Mark drifted away as friends do. We didn't talk about that night much, even between ourselves. What was there to say? We saw something. Impossible. Something that shouldn't exist. Fast forward 42 years. Jason and I moved back to Washington about 5 years ago after he retired. We built a house near Randall, not far from where we'd experienced that strange encounter all those decades ago. Sometimes, when we're driving those same forest roads, I can feel Jason tense up beside me. He remembers exactly where it happened. He could drive straight to that spot without hesitation, though we never do. Last month I was watching this TV show about Sasquatch sightings in the Pacific Northwest. They were interviewing people who claimed to have seen something in the forests of Washington. Their descriptions were eerily similar to what we saw. The height, the broad shoulders, the way it moved. I found myself wondering how many others have seen what we saw, but kept quiet out of fear of ridicule. I looked up reports from that area online and found something that made my blood run cold. In the summer of '81, the same summer as our encounter, 3 hikers went missing in the Dark Divide region. They were never found. The article mentioned unusual circular patterns of dead vegetation found near their last known location. Jason doesn't like when I bring it up. He says some things are better left in the past. Maybe he's right. But I still wake up sometimes with those glowing eyes vivid in my memory. I still wonder what was watching us that night, and sometimes, when I'm alone in our house with the forest pressing close against our windows, I wonder if it's still out there. Whatever we saw that night wasn't a bear, wasn't a person, wasn't anything I can explain. After all these years, I still don't have answers. Just the memory of those eyes, that massive silhouette, and the perfect circle of dead grass that shouldn't have been there. And sometimes, that's what scares me the most. Not that we saw something impossible, but that after 42 years, I'm no closer to understanding what it was. This is story 4. I've never really told this story properly. Not the whole thing, anyway. It's been 40 years, but sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, thinking I can hear those sounds again. It happened in the summer of '83. I was 15, working as a junior camp leader at Camp Goodtimes near Gibsons, British Columbia. I'd been going there since I was 9, and this was my first year with actual responsibilities. I was so damn proud of my green leader shirt, wore it everywhere that summer like it was some kind of superhero cape. That week, I was paired with Dave, one of the senior counselors. He was 19 in college, studying forestry or something. Really outdoorsy guy with this big red beard despite being so young. We were assigned to take 9 boys on an overnight hike to Tetrahedron Ridge. These were 12 and 13-year-old kids, most of them from Vancouver. City kids, basically, though a couple had done some hiking before. It was supposed to be routine. We'd done this exact hike like a dozen times that summer already. 6 kilometers up to the ridge, camp overnight, then back down the next day. Easy. The trail went through this old logging area, lots of clear cuts with new growth coming in, some patches of original forest still standing. Pretty typical BC backcountry. We left camp around 9 in the morning. Weather was perfect, sunny, maybe 75 degrees, slight breeze. I remember feeling so important with my little clipboard, checking off supplies as Dave handed out trail mix and canteens. The boys were excited, shoving each other, making jokes about bears and cougars, the usual stuff. The first couple hours were completely normal. We stopped for lunch around 11:30 at this little creek crossing. I was helping one of the kids, Tommy, I think, fix his backpack strap when Dave came over and crouched next to me. "Hey, Mark," he said quietly. "Did you see that?" He nodded toward the hillside above us, across the clear cut. "See what?" I asked. "I don't know. Something big moving up there." I followed his gaze but didn't see anything. Just the usual mix of stumps, new growth, and the occasional standing tree. "Probably a deer," I said, "or maybe a black bear." Bears weren't uncommon, but they usually kept their distance. Dave nodded, but he looked unsettled. "Yeah, probably." We got moving again after lunch. The trail started climbing more steeply, switching back through the clear cut. That's when I saw it for the first time. We were on this exposed section of trail, and I glanced up toward the ridgeline. Something huge and dark moved between two stands of trees. It was upright, walking on two legs, but it was massive, way too big to be a person. I only saw it for maybe 2 seconds before it disappeared into the tree line. My heart started hammering in my chest. I hurried up to Dave, who was leading the group. "I saw something," I whispered. "Up on the ridge." His face got serious. "What did it look like?" "Huge, black, walking on two legs." I hesitated. "It wasn't a bear." "How tall?" he asked. I thought about it. 8 feet, maybe taller. He didn't say anything for a minute, then, "Let's keep the group together. No stragglers." About half an hour later, Dave stopped suddenly, causing a mini pile-up of sweaty preteens behind him. He was staring at the ground. When I caught up, I saw what had stopped him. There was a footprint pressed into the soft dirt of the trail. Not a boot print. This thing was huge, maybe 16 inches long, with what looked like 5 toes. It was pressed deep into the mud, like whatever made it was incredibly heavy. Dave looked at me, his face pale beneath his sunburn. Neither of us said anything, but I could tell we were thinking the same thing. He quickly ushered the boys past it, making up some excuse about checking the trail ahead. The third sighting happened, around 2 in the afternoon. We were passing through one of the few remaining stands of old-growth forest. The trees were massive, ancient cedars and Douglas firs towering overhead. The trail narrowed here, forcing us to go single file. I was bringing up the rear, making sure nobody fell behind, when I heard a crack from somewhere to my right. I turned just in time to see something massive slip behind a huge cedar about 40 yards away. All I caught was a glimpse of dark fur or hair and an impression of height. Whatever it was, its shoulders were easily 8 or 9 feet off the ground. I nearly tripped over my own feet trying to catch up with the group. When I reached Dave, he was already looking back in my direction, his face tense. "Did you?" he started. "Yeah," I cut him off, not wanting the kids to hear. "Should we turn back?" Dave checked his watch and looked at the sky. "It's almost 3. If we turn back now, we'd be hiking in the dark before we reach camp." He lowered his voice. "I think we should continue to the ridge. We're more exposed up there, better visibility." Looking back, that was probably a mistake. But at 15, I deferred to Dave's judgment. He was the adult after all. As we continued climbing, we started noticing more signs. Broken branches snapped off at impossible heights, 9 feet up or higher. More footprints. Once, a strong, musky odor that made my nose wrinkle and my stomach turn. The boys, thankfully, remained oblivious, complaining about sore feet and asking how much further. The 4th and 5th sightings happened within an hour of each other. Same pattern, a large, dark figure, always uphill from us, always at a distance, moving with surprising speed and agility for something so big. Each time, it would disappear into the brush or trees before we could get a clear look. By now, Dave and I were exchanging frequent glances. We'd both grown up in BC, heard all the stories. Neither of us had ever believed them, not really. But up, there on that mountain, with the evidence right in front of us, it was getting harder to deny. We reached the ridge around 5:30. There's a small plateau near the top with a natural clearing, the designated camping area. Dave had the boys set up their tents while I gathered firewood. The whole time, I kept scanning the tree line, my skin crawling with the sensation of being watched. We made dinner, hot dogs roasted over the fire, baked beans, the usual camp fare. As the sun started to set, we did some stupid campfire songs and ghost stories. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, telling made-up stories about hook-handed killers, while something much more terrifying was potentially watching us from the darkness. By 9, we had the boys in their tents, 4 tents for the kids, with Dave and I sharing one at the edge of the clearing. I remember sitting by the dying fire with Dave, neither of us saying much. The stars were coming out, brilliantly clear in the mountain air. It would have been beautiful if I hadn't been so terrified. "What do you think it is?" I finally asked, keeping my voice low. Dave poked at the embers with a stick. "You know what it is." "That's not possible," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew I didn't believe them. "There are 9 kids here," Dave said. "Our job is to get them back to camp safely tomorrow. That's all we need to focus on right now." Around 10, we doused the fire and crawled into our tent. I don't think either of us expected to sleep, but we went through the motions, unrolling our sleeping bags, taking off our boots. I kept my flashlight and pocket knife within reach. The night was quiet at first. Too quiet, actually. No owls, no rustling of small animals. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath. It must have been around midnight when it started. I was lying awake, staring at the tent ceiling, when I heard it, a deep, guttural roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not a bear, not a cougar, not any animal I could identify. It was primal, ancient, and terrifying. The sound vibrated through my chest like it was physically touching me. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. "Dave," I whispered, but he was already sitting up. "I heard it," he said. Almost immediately, the boys started calling out from their tents. Dave grabbed his flashlight and went to reassure them while I stayed by the tent entrance, peering out into the darkness. The moon was nearly full, casting the clearing in a silvery light. The surrounding forest was a wall of black shadows. I strained my eyes, trying to detect any movement, but saw nothing. Dave returned a few minutes later. "Told them it was just a bear," he said. "Far away, nothing to worry about." "That wasn't a bear," I said. "I know." We sat back to back at the entrance of our tent, flashlights in hand, listening. For almost an hour, nothing happened. Some of the boys had fallen back asleep. Others were whispering amongst themselves. Then it came again, that same bone-chilling roar, but closer this time. It was followed by another, then another, like there were multiple creatures calling to each other across the mountains. The sounds echoed off the ridge, making it impossible to pinpoint their source. My whole body was shaking. I remember gripping my flashlight so hard my fingers cramped. Dave had his hand on my shoulder, whether to reassure me or to steady himself, I couldn't tell. "It's trying to scare us off," he whispered. The roaring continued intermittently for hours. Sometimes it seemed to come from one direction, sometimes another. Around 2 in the morning, we heard something moving in the brush about 200 meters below our camp. Heavy footsteps, snapping branches, the sound of something large pushing through the undergrowth. The boys were all awake now, huddled together in their tents. We'd told them to stay inside no matter what. Dave and I remained at our post, back to back, watching the perimeter of the clearing. I'll never forget the feeling of those hours, the absolute certainty that we were being hunted, or at least tested. Whatever was out there, it was intelligent. It was coordinating its movements, using sound to intimidate us, staying just out of sight. Around 4 in the morning, the eastern sky began to lighten slightly. The roars had stopped about an hour earlier, but we could still hear occasional movement in the forest below us. As soon as it was light enough to see the trail, Dave and I made the decision to break camp. We woke the boys, most of whom had finally fallen into uneasy sleep, and had them pack as quickly as possible. We skipped breakfast, handing out granola bars instead. By 6:30, we were heading down the mountain at a pace that was just short of running. The boys, sensing our urgency, didn't complain or drag their feet. We moved as a tight group, Dave in front, me in the back, constantly scanning the forest around us. We didn't see or hear anything on the way down. Whatever had been there during the night seemed to have retreated with the daylight. We reached the main camp just after 9, exhausted, rattled, but physically unharmed. The camp director asked how the trip went. Dave and I exchanged glances, then mumbled something about it being fine. We never officially reported what happened. It was 1983. No one had cell phones with cameras, no way to document what we'd experienced. And what would we have said anyway? That we were harassed all night by Sasquatch. We'd have been laughed out of camp. So we kept quiet. The boys surprisingly did too. I think they sensed it was something beyond their understanding, something adults wouldn't believe. Or maybe they just convinced themselves it really was bears or wolves, like we'd told them. I've been back to those mountains many times since then. I still love the outdoors, still go camping and hiking. But I never sleep well in the wilderness anymore. Part of me is always listening, always waiting to hear those roars again. I know what we experienced that night. I know what was watching us from the darkness. I don't need anyone to believe me. I was there, and after 40 years, I still can't explain what happened on Tetrahedron Ridge. Story 5. I've always been a bit of a worrier, especially when it comes to my kids. After my divorce 3 years ago, it's just been me, Aiden, 10, and Lily, 8. We live in Phoenix, and let me tell you, August in the desert is absolutely brutal. The kids had been cooped up inside all summer because of the heat, and I could tell they were getting restless. So when my co-worker mentioned her family cabin in the Mogollon Rim that was available to rent, I jumped at the chance. A weekend away from the heat, surrounded by trees instead of cacti, seemed perfect. The drive up was beautiful, watching the landscape change from desert to pine forest as we climbed in elevation. The kids were excited, pointing out every deer and elk we spotted along the highway. My GPS lost signal about 20 miles before our turnoff, but the printed directions my co-worker gave me were detailed enough. We turned onto this unmarked dirt road that seemed to go on forever. "Are we lost, Mom?" Lily asked after we'd been bouncing along for nearly half an hour. "No, sweetie. The cabin's just really secluded," I assured her, though I was starting to wonder myself. The road narrowed as we went deeper into the forest. We passed a couple of campsites, one with an older couple in a massive RV who waved as we drove by, and another with what looked like a family setting up tents, then another smaller campsite with just a pickup truck parked beside it. After that, nothing. Just trees, more trees, and occasionally a clearing. The directions said 12 miles down this road, and my odometer confirmed we were getting close. When we finally spotted the cabin, it was nearly 2 in the afternoon. It was smaller than I expected. Just a one-room structure with a kitchenette in one corner, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and 3 beds, 2 twins for the kids, and what was supposed to be a pull-out sofa for me, but turned out to be a folding cot that looked like it had seen better days. "This is awesome," Aiden declared, immediately claiming the bed nearest the window. Kids are so easy to please sometimes. We spent the afternoon exploring the immediate area around the cabin, gathering pine cones and taking pictures. I set up my trail camera, pointing toward our parking area and the tree line, something we always do on our outdoor adventures. The kids love checking it the next morning to see what visited overnight. Usually back home in our desert trips, we catch coyotes or javelinas. As the sun started setting, the forest took on this eerie quality. The shadows stretched longer, and the silence became more noticeable. No traffic noise, no neighbors' music, no planes overhead, just nothing. It was beautiful but unsettling for a city girl like me. We made dinner on the tiny two-burner stove, played cards, and as night fully settled in, the darkness outside became absolute. I mean absolute darkness, the kind you never experience in the city. When I stepped outside to grab more water from the car, I couldn't see my hand in front of my face until my eyes adjusted. The stars were incredible though, a brilliant carpet of light against perfect blackness. Around 10:30, the kids were in their beds playing on their iPods before sleep. I'd promised them 30 minutes of screen time since we had no TV. I was arranging my bedding on the awful cot when we all heard it, a distinct tapping sound against the window on the south side of the cabin. Not loud, but clear enough that all three of us looked up, immediately. "What was that?" Lily asked, her voice small. "What was what?" I replied casually, though my heart had jumped. "That noise," Aidan said, pointing to the window, "like something hit it." I walked over to the window and peered out, seeing nothing but darkness. "Probably just a bug hitting the glass," I said with forced cheerfulness. "Or maybe a pine cone fell from the roof." But there was no wind that night, not even a breeze, and it didn't sound like an insect. It was more deliberate, like a small pebble had been tossed against the glass. "There's nothing out there, guys. We're totally safe in here," I assured them, making a mental note to check around the cabin in the morning. Time to put those iPods away and get some sleep. The kids fell asleep quickly, as kids do, but that cot was a medieval torture device. The metal frame dug into my back no matter how I positioned myself, and the thin mattress offered zero support. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours, drifting off only to wake up 20 minutes later with a new body part aching. I'm not sure what time it was, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, when I woke again. I lay there in the darkness, eyes closed, trying to will myself back to sleep, despite the uncomfortable cot. The cabin was silent except for the kids' steady breathing and the occasional creak of the wooden structure settling. That's when I heard it, a sound that made every hair on my body stand up. It was a vocalization. Not an animal sound I recognized, not a coyote or an owl or even an elk. It wasn't quite human either, it was somewhere in between. A sort of whooping call that rose and then fell in pitch. It wasn't super loud, but in the dead silence of the night, it carried clearly to my ears through the closed windows. My eyes snapped open, and I lay frozen, listening intently, wondering if I'd imagined it. 8, 9, 10 seconds passed, and then a knock. A single, deliberate knock, like wood striking wood. Both sounds seemed to come from the same direction, somewhere southeast of the cabin, maybe 50 meters away. I carefully sat up, trying not to make the cot creak. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I glanced at the kids, still sleeping peacefully. Should I wake them? No, that would just scare them. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just some camper out there, though why anyone would be making those sounds in the middle of the night? I strained my ears, listening for any sound of movement, footsteps brushing against foliage, anything. But there was nothing. Just the perfect silence of the forest at night. Then, about a minute later, it happened again. The same strange vocalization, followed by another single knock from the same direction. This time, I got up and moved silently to the window facing southeast. I cupped my hands around my eyes to reduce the reflection and peered out into the darkness. Nothing. Just blackness beyond the small circle of visibility around the cabin. But I knew something was out there. Something that was making those sounds deliberately. Was it trying to communicate? With us? With something else? I checked the door to make sure it was locked, then the windows. I considered waking the kids and packing up right then, but the thought of driving that isolated dirt road in the pitch darkness was even more terrifying than staying put. At least in the cabin we had walls around us. I sat on the edge of the cot, fully alert now, listening. The vocalizations and knocks didn't come again, but something else happened that was almost worse, a feeling of being watched. You know that sensation where your brain just screams that eyes are on you? That's what I felt, sitting there in that cabin in the middle of nowhere. I don't know how long I sat there, rigid with fear. An hour, 2. Eventually my exhaustion won out over my terror, and I must have fallen asleep sitting up, because the next thing I knew, early morning, light was filtering through the windows, and Aiden was tugging at my sleeve. "Mom, can we have breakfast? I'm starving." I jumped, momentarily disoriented. "Yeah, of course, buddy," I said, my voice hoarse. Let me get the stove going." As I prepared breakfast, my mind replayed the night's events. In the daylight, it was easier to dismiss my fears. Maybe those sounds had natural explanations. Maybe I had been half dreaming. But then Lily said something that chilled me all over again. "Mum, did you hear the weird noises last night, after we went to sleep?" I nearly dropped the pan. What noises, sweetie?" "Like someone going whoop and then knocking," she said casually, as if discussing the weather. "I heard it when I got up to pee." Aiden rolled his eyes. "You're making that up. You always make stuff up." "Am not," Lily protested. "I really heard it," I interrupted before they could start bickering. "Let's check the trail camera. Maybe we caught some cool animals overnight." That distracted them, and after breakfast, we retrieved the camera. I felt a flutter of anticipation as I scrolled through the images. Would we see what had made those sounds? A person, an animal I couldn't identify, but the camera showed nothing, absolutely nothing. Just empty frame after empty frame of our parked car and the tree line. Not even a raccoon or rabbit passed by. Just hours of emptiness. That's when I noticed something else strange. The other campsites we'd passed on our way in were all vacant. As we packed up and drove out at 7 that morning, the RV was gone. The family with tents was gone. The pickup truck was gone. It was as if everyone had cleared out during the night, leaving us alone in that stretch of forest. We didn't see another person until we reached the main highway. I never told anyone about that night except my sister, who suggested it might have been Bigfoot, which made me laugh nervously. But I've researched those wood knocks since then. Apparently, they're associated with Sasquatch encounters. Some people believe they use them to communicate with each other. I don't know what was out there that night. I don't know if it was watching us, communicating with something else, or if there's some perfectly logical explanation I'm missing. All I know is that I can still hear those sounds in my head sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep. That strange vocalization followed by that single, deliberate knock. And I'll never take my kids back to a remote cabin in the woods again, no matter how hot the Arizona summer gets. Story 6. I've been debating whether to post this for years. I'm not the type to believe in cryptids or monsters or whatever, but something happened to me back in '98 that I still can't explain. I've told a few close friends, but most people just think I'm making it up or that I saw a bear cub. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. This happened in the fall of 1998. I was 26 then, living just outside Olympia, Washington. I'd grown up in the area and knew the back roads like the back of my hand. There's this one road that cuts through some really dense forest. It's narrow, barely 2 lanes, and winds around like a snake. Locals use it as a shortcut, but tourists avoid it because of how tight some of the turns are. That evening, I was driving home from my buddy Mike's place around dusk. It was that time when it's not quite dark yet, but the shadows are getting longer, you know. The light was fading, but I could still see pretty clearly. It had rained earlier that day, but it had stopped, leaving everything damp and the air crisp. You could smell the pine and wet earth through the cracked window of my old Ford Ranger. I wasn't worried about driving in the dim light. I'd taken this route hundreds of times, and I knew where all the sharp turns were. There were small ponds, scattered alongside parts of the road, and the headlights would occasionally catch the reflection of water through the trees. This time of evening, deer would often come out to drink, so I was driving slower than usual, maybe 30 miles per hour. The last thing I needed was to wreck my truck hitting Bambi. I remember I had the radio on low, some classic rock station playing Fleetwood Mac. The heater was blowing because it was getting chilly, making that slight rattling sound my truck always made. Normal stuff, you know, nothing weird or out of the ordinary. As I approached one of the sharpest bends in the road, locals call it Devil's Elbow because of how suddenly it turns, I slowed down even more. This particular spot was notorious for deer crossings, and the trees grew right up to the edge of the pavement. My high beams were on, cutting through the growing darkness. That's when I saw them. Two eyes reflecting my headlights from about 10 feet off the road, maybe 15 feet up in a massive Douglas fir. At first I thought, great, just an owl. We have plenty of them in the area. Barred owls, great horned owls, and they're always perched in trees watching for prey. The eyes were round and had that same yellowish reflection that owl eyes get when light hits them. Nothing unusual. But then it moved. I'll never forget this as long as I live. The eyes shifted, and then this thing began to descend from the branch, not like an owl would fly away, but climbing down, deliberately, like it was using its hands. My first thought was, maybe it was a raccoon, but as it moved, I could tell it was way too big for that. I'd slowed my truck almost to a crawl by this point, partly because of the curve, and partly because I was trying to figure out what I was looking at. The headlights were pointed right at it as it came down the trunk. That's when I realized it wasn't climbing like a normal animal. It was lowering itself like a person would, but much more agile. When it reached the ground, it landed in a crouch, and I got my first clear look at it. The thing was covered head to toe in this thick, reddish-brown hair, not fur exactly, more like a shaggy coat that moved with it. It wasn't tall, maybe 4 feet or a little more, about the size of an 8 or 9-year-old kid, but the proportions were all wrong for a child. The arms seemed longer, and the way it moved was just not right. It never stood fully upright. Even when it stopped moving for a second and turned toward my truck, it stayed in this hunched position. The face was the part that really got to me. I couldn't make out clear features because of the hair, but there was something unsettlingly human-like about the way it turned to look at me. The eyes caught my headlights again, and for a split second we were just staring at each other. My heart was hammering in my chest. I remember my palms were suddenly slick with sweat on the steering wheel, and I had this weird ringing in my ears, like when you're about to pass out. I wasn't scared exactly, more like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Then it moved again. It turned away from the road and began scrambling up the ravine on the other side. The way it moved was crazy fast, but completely silent. No crashing through underbrush, no sound of footfalls on the damp ground, just this fluid, quick movement as it disappeared into the trees. The whole encounter couldn't have lasted more than 30 seconds, maybe less. But it felt like time had slowed down, and I was watching everything in slow motion. When it vanished into the darkness, I sat there for a minute, my truck idling on the empty road. I remember the sound of the engine seemed suddenly loud in the quiet forest. My hands were shaking as I put the truck back in drive and continued around the curve. I kept looking in my rear-view mirror, half expecting to see it following me or something. I drove the rest of the way home in a daze. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Was it a bear cub? No way. I've seen plenty of bear cubs, and they don't move like that. Was it some kid in a costume playing a prank? out there, miles from any houses, in the growing dark, and the movement was too natural. No costume would allow for that kind of agility. When I got home, I immediately called Mike. He's been my best friend since high school, and I knew if I told anyone, it would be him. When I explained what happened, he laughed at first, thinking I was messing with him, but something in my voice must have convinced him I was serious. "Dude, you know what this sounds like, right?" he said. I did know. I just didn't want to say it out loud because it sounded so ridiculous. A Sasquatch, a freaking Bigfoot, but a small one, like a juvenile or something. Mike suggested we go back the next day to look for tracks, and I agreed, though part of me didn't want to return to that spot. We went early the next morning, armed with a camera. This was before everyone had phones with cameras, remember? We parked at the exact spot and scoured the area where I'd seen the creature. The ground was damp from the rain, and we did find some impressions near where it had landed from the tree. They weren't clear footprints, more like depressions in the soft earth, but they definitely weren't from a deer or bear. They were too small for an adult human, but had a strange shape that neither of us could identify. We took some pictures, but honestly, they didn't show much when they were developed. The most convincing thing we found was on the tree itself. About 15 feet up where I'd first seen the eyes, there were some broken branches and what looked like hair caught on the rough bark. Reddish brown, just like what I'd seen. Mike managed to climb up and grab a small tuft of it. It wasn't like any animal hair either of us recognized, not coarse enough for deer, not the right color for a black bear. For weeks afterward, I avoided that road after dark. I'd take the long way home, adding 20 minutes to my drive just to stay on the main roads. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, questioning if I really saw what I thought I saw. But every time I went through it, I came to the same conclusion. What I saw wasn't anything I could explain. I did some research at the library. Again, this was '98. Google wasn't really a thing yet. Turns out there had been several Sasquatch sightings in that general area over the years. Most were dismissed as bears or people in costumes, but some came from pretty credible sources. Forest rangers, hunters, people who knew the difference between a bear and something else. The detail that stuck with me was that most Bigfoot sightings described creatures 7 to 9 feet tall. What I saw was much smaller. If these things were real, and if what I saw was one of them, it had to be young. That thought was somehow more disturbing. If there was a juvenile, there had to be adults nearby. I never reported my sighting officially. Who would I even tell? The local paper? The sheriff? I could already imagine the ridicule. Local man claims to see baby Bigfoot. Not exactly the kind of attention I wanted, so I kept it mostly to myself, apart from telling Mike and eventually my wife after we got married. I've been back on that road many times since then, always in daylight, always scanning the trees. I've never seen anything like it again. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was just my imagination, or the light playing tricks, or maybe some animal that I misidentified in the growing darkness. But then I remember how it moved, how it looked at me, the silence of its movements despite its size, the way it navigated down the tree and up the ravine with such unnatural speed and grace. No known animal moves like that. No human child could have moved that way either. It's been more than 20 years now, and I still don't have an explanation. All I know is what I saw that evening wasn't something that's supposed to exist. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a person, and it definitely wasn't my imagination. I don't know if it was a Sasquatch, a juvenile Bigfoot, or something else entirely. But it was real. It was there, and for those 30 seconds on that damp fall evening in 1998, our worlds crossed paths. I still drive that road sometimes, and I still watch the trees. Story 7. I can't believe I'm finally typing this out. I've told this story a few times over the years, but I've never written it down before. The memory is as clear as yesterday, even though it happened back in the spring of '85 when I was just 10 years old. I grew up near Dahlonega, Georgia, and back then, life was pretty simple. I spent most of my time outdoors, catching frogs, collecting rocks and spotting birds. I was that weird kid who could identify most birds in North Georgia by the time I was 9. I even helped some university students with their bird-watching projects sometimes. They'd take me along when they needed to catalogue species in certain areas. My parents were proud of that, called me their little professor. I didn't mind the nickname. I loved knowing things other kids didn't. My best friend back then was Daniel. He lived about a mile down the road from us, and we spent nearly every weekend together when the weather was nice. Daniel wasn't into birds like I was, but he liked hunting for cool rocks and exploring. That's what we were doing that day. Just being kids, really. It was a Saturday in April, warm, but not hot yet. The kind of perfect spring day that makes you want to be outside until your mom calls you in for dinner. My dad had dropped me off at Daniel's house around noon, and after lunch, we decided to follow the railroad tracks that ran behind his property. We'd done this dozens of times before, walking along the tracks, balancing on the rails, putting pennies down to get flattened, though my dad always said this could derail trains, so we stopped doing that. The tracks eventually crossed over the Chistadi River on this old bridge. It wasn't huge, maybe 80 feet long, but it stood pretty high above the water. The river moved fast there, tumbling over rocks before widening out past the bridge. We'd been to the bridge before, but never crossed it completely. That day, for whatever reason, we decided we would. We'd been out for maybe an hour, taking our time, stopping whenever we found something interesting. I had a small backpack where I kept my bird guide, a notebook, and a growing collection of unusual rocks. Daniel had found this perfect piece of quartz crystal earlier, clear with a pink tint to it. I was a little jealous, to be honest. As we got closer to the bridge, I remember noticing how quiet it had gotten. Usually, you'd hear all sorts of birds in that area, wrens, cardinals, sometimes even pileated woodpeckers hammering away, but there was nothing. I remember thinking it was strange, but didn't say anything to Daniel about it. Then the smell hit us. God, that smell. I've smelled some awful things in my life since then. Roadkill in summer heat, a freezer full of meat that spoiled during a power outage, but nothing has ever come close to what we smelled that day. It was like rotting meat, but worse, like something had died, been left in the sun for a week, then soaked in sour milk. It made my eyes water immediately. "What is that?" Daniel said, pulling his t-shirt up over his nose. "Probably a dead deer or something," I replied, though even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. This smell was too powerful, too wrong. We should have turned back. Every instinct was screaming at us to go home. But we were 10 and 9 years old, and the bridge was right there, and we'd already decided we were going to cross it that day. So we kept walking, trying to breathe through our mouths. The bridge didn't have any guardrails, just the tracks and wooden ties with gaps between them where you could see straight down to the water. We stepped carefully, not talking anymore. The smell got worse with every step. We were about a third of the way across when Daniel suddenly grabbed my arm. His fingers dug in so hard it hurt. I turned to ask what was wrong, but the words died in my throat when I saw his face. He was pale, eyes wide with terror, and he was pointing down toward the riverbank below us. I'll never forget what I saw when I looked down. Never. There was something there by the water, something massive. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Was it a bear? A person in a coat? But it wasn't either of those things. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, like someone wearing football pads, but the pads were under the skin. The whole body was covered in dark, matted fur. It was hunched over, staring down at the water, absolutely motionless. From where we stood on the bridge, I couldn't see its face, just the broad, sloping expanse of its back and those unnatural shoulders. Time seemed to stop. I don't know how long we stood there, probably only a few seconds, but it felt like forever. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think. The only thing going through my mind was that this thing shouldn't exist. It was wrong. It didn't belong in our world. Then Daniel broke free from whatever spell had frozen us both. Without a word, he turned and ran back the way we'd come, his feet pounding on the wooden ties. The sound seemed impossibly loud. I followed him instantly, not daring to look back. My backpack bounced painfully against my spine as I ran, but I didn't care. All I could think about was getting away from that thing by the river. We ran all the way back to Daniel's house, a full mile, without stopping once. I don't think either of us had ever run so fast before. By the time we reached his back porch, we were gasping for breath, our legs shaking. Daniel's mom was in the kitchen and called out to ask if we were okay. Daniel shouted back something about being fine, then went straight to his bedroom and locked the door. He wouldn't come out, wouldn't even talk to me through the door when I knocked. I heard him crying inside. I sat on their porch for a while, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Eventually, I went inside and asked to use their phone. I called my dad and asked him to come get me early. I didn't tell him why, just said Daniel wasn't feeling well. I couldn't bring myself to say what had happened. I was afraid he wouldn't believe me, or worse, that he would want to go back there and look. When my dad picked me up, he could tell something was wrong. I was quiet the whole ride home, which wasn't like me at all. I usually talked his ear off about whatever birds I'd spotted or rocks I'd found. He asked a few times if everything was okay, and I just nodded. What could I say? That we'd seen a monster? I didn't have the words. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those massive shoulders, that dark fur. I kept smelling that awful rotting stench, even though I'd showered twice since coming home. Around midnight, I got up and emptied my backpack, throwing away all the rocks I'd collected that day. I couldn't stand to look at them. The strangest thing happened after that day. Daniel and I never hung out again, not even once. On Monday at school, he avoided me completely. When I tried to talk to him at lunch, he got up and moved to another table. Within a few weeks, it was like we'd never been friends at all. I think what we saw that day broke something between us. It was like we'd shared this terrible secret, and neither of us could bear to be reminded of it by seeing each other. Maybe he blamed me for suggesting we go to the bridge, or maybe it was just too painful to be around someone who knew what he'd seen. I don't know. We never talked about it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I became obsessed with figuring out what we'd seen. I spent hours in the school library, looking through books about North American wildlife. Nothing matched. Bears weren't built like that. No known animal had those proportions. Then one day, about 3 weeks after it happened, I found a book about unexplained phenomena. There was a chapter on Bigfoot sightings, and there it was, descriptions of a large bipedal creature with broad shoulders, covered in dark fur. People reported the same horrible smell, the same feeling of wrongness and terror. I read everything I could find about Bigfoot after that. Most of the accounts were from the Pacific Northwest, not Georgia, but there were some reports from the Appalachian region. The descriptions matched what we'd seen by the Chistadi River. I never told my parents. I tried once, starting with, "Me and Daniel saw something weird by the river." But my dad immediately thought I meant a dead animal, or maybe someone dumping trash, and I lost my nerve. How do you tell your parents you saw a monster? Especially when you're the little professor who knows all about real animals. I went back to those railroad tracks eventually, but never alone, and never all the way to the bridge. A few times I rode my bike to where the tracks started near Daniel's house, but I could never make myself follow them toward the river. Something deep inside me knew that whatever we'd seen that day was still out there. I'm 39 now. I've got kids of my own. We live in Atlanta, far from those woods and that bridge. I still birdwatch sometimes, but never alone in remote areas. I've never told my wife about what happened. How could I? By the way, honey, I saw Bigfoot when I was 10, and it messed me up for life. Yeah, right. But sometimes When I'm driving through rural areas and pass a stretch of woods or a river, I find myself scanning the tree line, looking for movement, for those unnatural shoulders. And sometimes, just for a second, I swear I catch that smell again, that rotting, sour stench that has no business existing in our world. Daniel moved away the next year. His dad got a job in another state. We never spoke again after that day. Not one word. Sometimes I wonder if he ever told anyone what we saw, if he still thinks about it like I do, if he still has nightmares about what might have happened if that thing had looked up and seen us standing on the bridge above it. I still don't know what it was we saw that day by the Chistadi River, but I know it was real, and I know it changed both of us forever. Some things you can't unsee, can't unlearn. There are things in this world that don't fit into the neat categories we're taught about in school, things that shouldn't exist, but do. And sometimes they're hunched over by a river in rural Georgia, while two kids who should have stayed home that day stand frozen in terror on a railroad bridge above. Story 8. I've been debating whether to post this for months now. I'm not the type who believes in monsters or things that go bump in the night. I'm a practical guy, a construction worker who deals with concrete facts, measurements and deadlines. But something happened last winter that I still can't explain, and it's been eating at me ever since. This happened back in January, on a Sunday morning near Mount Graham. I live in the foothills, about 20 miles outside of Safford, Arizona. Usually, I don't work weekends, but we were behind schedule on this commercial project because of bad weather, so the crew was putting in extra hours to catch up. That morning, I had to head in earlier than usual because there'd been a decent snowfall overnight, and I knew the drive would take longer. My supervisor had texted everyone the night before, "Roads will be shit tomorrow. Leave early." I set my alarm for 4:30 in the morning, figuring that would give me plenty of time. When I stepped outside my house around 5, I immediately knew the drive was going to be worse than I'd anticipated. The fog was insane, like nothing I'd seen before in the 8 years I've lived here. It was that weird, dense kind that seems to swallow sound. You know the type? Where everything feels muffled and strange. The temperature gauge in my truck read 22 degrees when I started the engine. I remember letting it warm up longer than usual while scraping a thin layer of ice off the windshield, watching my breath cloud in front of my face. The fog was so thick around my porch light that it looked like someone had draped white sheets all around the property. Once I got on the main road, I had to slow to a crawl. I'm talking maybe 15 miles per hour, tops. My headlights were barely cutting through 20 feet of visibility. It was like driving through milk. The snow wasn't too deep, maybe 3 or 4 inches, but the fog made it impossible to see where the road ended and the shoulder began. I was basically navigating by keeping the center line just visible out my driver's side window. About 5 miles into my drive, I was on that winding stretch where the road curves around the base of Mount Graham. There are no streetlights out there, just dense forest on both sides. The only sounds were my engine humming and the crunch of snow under my tires. I had the heater blasting, but I was still shivering a bit. Maybe from the cold, maybe from how eerie everything felt. I remember thinking that high beams might help cut through the fog better, so I flipped them on. Big mistake. The light just reflected right back at me, turning everything into this disorienting white wall. I couldn't see anything at all, so I quickly switched them back off. And that's when it happened. Within 2 or 3 seconds of turning off the high beams, something emerged from the fog on the right side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer or an elk. We get plenty of those crossing the roads around here. But as it moved across my path, I realized it was all wrong. This thing was upright, walking on 2 legs, but not like a human walks. It was moving with these long, fluid strides that covered ground faster than someone running would. And it was tall, really tall. I'm 6 foot even, and this thing would have towered over me by at least a foot, probably more. It was covered in hair, not fur like an animal, but not clothes either. Just this dark, matted hair all over its body. No jacket, no pants, nothing you'd expect to see on a person out in 20-degree weather with snow on the ground. And definitely no shoes. It was barefoot in the snow, moving like the cold didn't affect it at all. The whole sighting lasted maybe 5 seconds at most. It never slowed down, never turned to look at me. Just this deliberate movement from one side of the road to the other before disappearing into the fog on the left side. The weird thing is how silent it was. With that size, you'd expect to hear footfalls, especially in snow, but there was nothing. Just this massive shape cutting through the fog and then vanishing. I immediately slowed the truck to a complete stop, right where it had crossed. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sat there for a minute, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd just seen. I'm not proud of this, but I was scared, really scared. The kind where your mouth goes dry and your skin feels too tight. But I was also weirdly curious. I rolled down my window and stuck my head out, straining to see or hear anything in the woods. Nothing but fog and silence. It was like watching something fall into a cloud. 1 second it was there, the next it was completely gone. I contemplated getting out to look for tracks, but something in my gut told me that was a terrible idea. I've spent enough time in these mountains to know when something feels wrong, and this felt very, very wrong. I put the truck back in drive and continued on, going even slower than before, constantly checking my mirrors and scanning the roadside. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. A bear? No way. Bears don't walk upright like that, especially not for that distance or at that speed. Some guy in a costume. Who would be out there at 5 in the morning in freezing temperatures, barefoot in the snow, just to scare random drivers? And nobody could move that fast in a bulky costume. When I got to the work site, I was still shaken up. A couple of the guys noticed and asked if I was okay. I just mumbled something about the bad driving conditions. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I think I just saw Bigfoot. They'd never let me live it down. Throughout the day, I kept replaying those few seconds in my mind. The height of the figure, the way it moved, the dark shape against the white fog. I've never believed in the whole Bigfoot thing. Always thought it was just stories people made up or misidentifications of known animals. But what I saw didn't match anything I know exists. After my shift, I took the long way home, deliberately passing the same stretch of road in daylight. The fog had mostly lifted by then. I slowed down where I thought the crossing had happened and scanned the roadside. There was nothing unusual, just snow disturbed by various tire tracks from the day's traffic. If there had been footprints earlier, they were long gone now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that figure every time I closed my eyes. I ended up going online and reading about Mount Graham and local legends. Turns out there have been stories about strange creatures in those mountains for generations. The Apache have legends about beings they call mountain spirits that live in the high country. There have been several Bigfoot sightings reported in the area over the years too. The next day at work, I casually asked one of the older guys who's lived in the area his whole life if he'd ever heard stories about strange things on Mount Graham. The look he gave me before changing the subject told me everything I needed to know. It's been 10 months now, and I still drive that road almost every day. I've never seen anything like that again, but I can't stop thinking about it. Sometimes when the fog rolls in, I find myself slowing down at that same spot, both dreading and hoping for another glimpse. I know how this sounds. If someone told me this story, I'd probably think they were full of it, or had seen a bear or a person and just misjudged in the fog. But I know what I saw. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. At least not any animal I recognize. The thing that gets me most is the casualness of it. Whatever it wasn't concerned about me at all. It was just going about its business, crossing from one part of its territory to another. Like I was the intruder, not it. I haven't told many people about this. My wife knows, and she believes I saw something, even if she's not convinced it was anything supernatural. A couple of close friends know too, but they just give me that look. The one that says they think I'm either lying or confused. That's why I'm posting this here. I need to tell someone who might actually understand or have experienced something similar. I'm not claiming I saw Bigfoot or some mythical creature. I'm just saying I saw something that doesn't fit into my understanding of what exists in those mountains. Something that walked upright but wasn't human. Something that could move through snow, barefoot, in freezing temperatures like it was nothing. I still work construction. I still measure twice and cut once. I still deal in concrete facts. But now I know that there are things out there that don't fit neatly into what we think we know about the world. And sometimes, on foggy mornings when I'm driving to work, I find myself scanning the tree line, wondering if it's watching me from just beyond, where my eyes can see. Story 9. I still get goosebumps thinking about that day in June 1986. It's been almost 4 decades, but I can still feel the cold rain hitting my jacket and smell the damp earth beneath my boots. I've spent my whole life in the forests of British Columbia, hunting, fishing, hiking, but nothing prepared me for what happened at White Swan Lake. My buddy Mark and I had been planning this mushroom hunting trip for weeks. The spring rains had been perfect that year, and a local Tenochtitlan man named Joseph told us about this spot in Coyote Creek Valley, where morels grew like crazy. Said his family had been picking there for generations. That morning started like any other outdoor expedition. We loaded up my old Ford pickup around 5 in the morning, thermos of coffee between us, rain gear packed because the forecast called for showers. Mark was nursing a hangover from the night before, complaining about his head pounding with every bump in the logging road. "You're gonna have to drop me off and pick me up later," Mark groaned as we bounced along. "I can't do this all day." Typical Mark. So I agreed to come back for him around 4 in the afternoon. He'd stick to the easy spots near the main road while I'd cross the creek to the south side, where Joseph said the really good patches were. The rain started just as I parked the truck near an old logging trail. The forest was thick there, towering cedars and Douglas firs that blocked most of the light, making it feel like dusk, even though it was only 9 in the morning. I grabbed my gear, knife, collection bucket, walking stick and rain jacket and headed into the woods. It's hard to explain how peaceful it was despite the weather. The rain created this constant white noise that drowned out everything except the occasional call of a raven or the distant rush of Coyote Creek. The forest floor was spongy with decades of fallen needles and moss, and the air smelled rich with decomposition and new growth. I crossed the creek using this massive fallen log, must have been 4 feet in diameter, and made my way to the south slope. Joseph was right. Within 20 minutes, I had already filled a quarter of my bucket with perfect morels. Their honeycomb caps were poking up through the soil around decaying stumps and fallen trees. The rain picked up around 11, coming down in sheets now, but I barely noticed. When you're in the zone picking mushrooms, you develop this tunnel vision. Your eyes adjust to scanning the ground in patterns, identifying the subtle shapes and colors that stand out from the forest floor. I was completely absorbed in this rhythm, walk a few steps, squat down, collect, move on. By 1 in the afternoon, my back was starting to ache from all the bending over, but my bucket was almost full. I figured I'd push just a little deeper into the valley before heading back. The terrain got steeper and the underbrush thicker. Salmonberry bushes with their thorny stems grabbed at my clothes, and fallen logs created natural barriers I had to climb over. I remember checking my watch, 1:27, and thinking I should probably start heading back soon. The rain had let up slightly, but water was still dripping from the canopy above, creating this constant patter on my hood. That's when I heard it. At first I thought it was just a tree creaking in the wind. You hear that sound all the time in old-growth forests. But this was different. It was a deliberate cracking sound, like something was breaking rather than just bending. I stopped and listened, my hand frozen mid-reach for a moral. The sound came again, a deep wooden crack, followed by a groaning noise that seemed to vibrate through the ground. It was coming from my right, maybe 30 yards away, partially obscured by a thicket of young alders. I turned slowly, water dripping from my hood onto my face. Through the screen of trees and rain, I saw movement. Something dark was pushing against a good-sized tree, not some sapling, but a mature tree at least 14 inches thick, maybe more. My first thought was bear. We'd had a lot of black bears that spring, and sometimes they'll push against trees to mark territory. But as I squinted through the rain, I realized whatever was pushing that tree wasn't on all fours. It was standing upright. I can't really explain the feeling that washed over me. It wasn't exactly fear. Not yet. It was more like my brain was refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. The figure was on the far side of the tree, facing in my general direction, but with the trunk between us. All I could make out was dark shape, significantly taller than me, and I'm 6'1". The thing, and I still don't know what else to call it, had its arms extended, pressing against the tree. As I watched, frozen in place, the tree bent. It fucking bent. Not like it was swaying in the wind, but like something with enormous strength was deliberately pushing it. There was another crack, louder this time, and I saw the roots on the near side of the tree lifting from the ground. That's when my brain finally caught up with my eyes, and the fear hit me like a truck. Whatever was pushing that tree had enough strength to uproot it. I don't remember consciously deciding to move. 1 second I was standing there, and the next I was backing away as quietly as possible, my mushroom bucket clutched against my chest. I didn't turn around, couldn't turn around, because some primal part of my brain wouldn't let me take my eyes off that shape. When I'd put about 15 yards between us, the thing stopped pushing and went still. I can't say for certain, but I felt like it had noticed me. There was this palpable shift in the air, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then it moved, not toward me, thank God, but it shifted its position, and I caught a glimpse of what looked like an arm. Far, too long and covered in dark hair as it moved to the other side of the tree. That's when I broke. I turned and ran, no longer caring about being quiet. I crashed through the underbrush, slipping on wet leaves and stumbling over roots. My mushroom bucket banged against my leg, spilling half my day's harvest, but I didn't care. All I wanted was to get back across that creek. I remember the sound of my own breathing, harsh and ragged, and the pounding of my heart that seemed louder than my footfalls. I kept expecting to hear something crashing through the forest behind me, but there was nothing, just the rain and my own panic. When I reached the creek, I practically sprinted across that log, not even caring that it was slick with rain and moss. On the other side, I finally stopped and looked back. Nothing had followed me, at least nothing I could see. I made it back to the truck in record time and locked myself inside. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before getting them in the ignition. I didn't start the engine though. Mark was still out there somewhere, and I couldn't leave without him. So I sat there, jumping at every sound, constantly checking my mirrors and scanning the tree line. The windows fogged up from my breathing, and I had to keep wiping them clear with my sleeve. My wet clothes stuck to the seat, and I was shivering. From cold or fear, I couldn't tell. I must have sat there for 2 hours before Mark finally emerged from the trail, looking pleased with himself and carrying a full bucket of mushrooms. He didn't notice anything was wrong until he got in the truck and saw my face. "Jesus, Dan, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, shaking rain from his hat. I didn't know what to tell him. How do you explain something like that without sounding crazy? So I just mumbled something about getting spooked by a noise in the woods. Mark laughed it off, thinking I was embarrassed about being scared, and spent the drive back telling me about all the perfect morels he'd found. 2 days later, I ran into Joseph at the general store. He noticed right away that something was off with me, and when I reluctantly told him where I'd been and what I'd heard, his expression changed. "You went to the south side of the creek?" he asked, his voice dropping. When I nodded, he sighed. "I should have warned you better. That area..." My people don't go there much anymore. He told me that 3 nights before my trip, he'd been outside his cabin about 2 miles from where I was picking and heard a scream that made his blood run cold. Said it sounded almost human, but not quite. Higher pitched and more powerful than any person could make. Sasquatch, he said simply, like he was telling me it might rain tomorrow. They don't like people crossing into their territory. I've never gone back to that spot. Never told many people about what happened either. Who would believe me? I still mushroom hunt, still spend time in the woods, but something changed in me that day. I became more cautious, more aware of how little we actually know about the wilderness around us. Sometimes when it rains, I think about that dark figure and the sound of that tree cracking. I think about the strength it would take to bend a mature tree like it was nothing more than a sapling. And I wonder what would have happened if it had decided to come after me instead of letting me go. I can't explain what I saw that day at Coyote Creek Valley. All I know is that in those few moments, everything I thought I understood about the forests I'd spent my whole life in changed. There are things out there we don't understand, things that have been there long before us. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough, you catch a glimpse of them through the rain. Story 10. I still don't know what to make of what happened to me last August. I've spent months trying to rationalize it, but I can't shake the feeling that what I saw that night was real. I'm sharing this now because I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I'm an amateur photographer, nothing professional, just a hobby I picked up after my divorce 3 years ago. I mostly focus on landscapes and night photography. There's something calming about being alone with my camera, capturing moments that most people miss while they're sleeping. Last August, the 27th to be exact, I decided to drive out to this ridge I'd heard about from another photographer in my online group. It's at the eastern edge of Olympic National Forest, about 2 hours from my apartment in Tacoma. This spot was supposed to be perfect for astrophotography, far enough from any towns that light pollution wouldn't be an issue, but still accessible by car without having to hike miles into the wilderness. I left home around 7 in the evening, so I'd have plenty of time to find the place and set up before it got completely dark. I packed my Canon EOS R6, 3 different lenses, my sturdiest tripod, some snacks, 2 thermoses of coffee, and a folding chair. I also brought my portable phone charger, headlamp, and a thick jacket, because even in August, the nights get cold up there. The drive was uneventful. I followed my GPS until the paved road turned to gravel, then to dirt. The last mile was rough. My Subaru handled it fine, but I was glad I hadn't brought my old sedan. When I finally reached the ridge around 8:30, the sun was just setting, painting the sky in pinks and oranges. It was breathtaking. The ridge overlooked a valley full of towering pines and firs. I could see for miles, and there wasn't a single artificial light visible in any direction. Just wilderness. I remember thinking how small I felt, how insignificant against all that ancient forest. The air smelled incredible, like pine needles, moss, and that earthy scent you only get in old forests. It was so quiet, I could hear the wind moving through the trees below. I spent about 40 minutes setting up my gear at the edge of a small clearing. There was a flat area, perfect for my tripod, with an unobstructed view of the sky. As darkness fell completely, the stars began to appear, first just a few, then hundreds, then thousands. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. I couldn't stop smiling. This was exactly what I'd been hoping for. For the next few hours, I was completely absorbed in my photography. I'd take a series of long exposure shots, check them on my camera's display, adjust my settings, and try again. I experimented with different angles and compositions. The temperature dropped steadily, and I was glad for my jacket and the hot coffee. Around midnight, I decided to take a break. My back was stiff from hunching over my camera, and I needed to stretch. I stood up, arching my back and rolling my shoulders. I took a few steps away from my tripod and breathed deeply, savoring the crisp night air. That's when I noticed it. At first I thought it was just a tree at the far edge of the clearing, maybe 30 yards away, something tall and dark against the darker forest behind it. But trees don't move. This shifted, just slightly, but enough that I froze mid-stretch. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing in the darkness. The moon was just a thin crescent that night, and most of my light came from the stars. I had my headlamp, but it was sitting on my folding chair, and I was afraid to move toward it. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was looking at something massive. It stood upright like a person, but much bigger, at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. It had a broad frame with long arms that hung down past what would be its knees. Its head sat low, directly on what looked like thick shoulders, with no visible neck. The shape was unmistakably not human. My heart felt like it was trying to pound its way out of my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, completely exposed in the clearing, staring at this thing, while it stared back at me. I know it was watching me. I couldn't make out any eyes in the darkness, but I felt its gaze as surely as I felt anything in my life. It was aware, it was intelligent, and it was observing me just as intently as I was observing it. We stayed like that, neither moving for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two. My mind was racing through possibilities. Bear? No, bears don't stand like that. Moose? Wrong shape entirely. Person in a costume? Out here, miles from anywhere, in the middle of the night? No way. I was certain it was going to charge at me. My car was about 50 yards behind me, but I'd have to turn my back on this thing to run for it. My keys were in my pocket, but they might as well have been back in Tacoma for all the good they'd do me if this creature decided to attack. But it didn't move toward me. It just watched. Then, without making a sound, and this is what still haunts me, it turned and walked into the forest. No crashing through underbrush, no breaking branches, no footfalls I could hear. It moved silently, impossibly quietly for something so large, and the darkness between the trees seemed to swallow it whole. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone. I stood frozen for another full minute, afraid it might come back. When nothing happened, I lunged for my headlamp and switched it on, sweeping the beam across the edge of the clearing. There was nothing there. No movement, no glowing eyes reflecting back, nothing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the light. I felt exposed, vulnerable. Whatever that thing was, it knew exactly where I was, and I had no idea where it had gone. I should have packed up right then and left. That would have been the sensible thing to do, but fear does strange things to your logic. I was terrified of turning my back on the forest edge to pack up my gear. I was scared of making noise. Most of all, I was afraid of being caught in the middle of packing up if that thing decided to come back. So I did something incredibly stupid. I stayed put. I retreated to my car, locked the doors, and sat there with the engine off, watching my equipment through the windshield. I told myself I'd wait just 15 minutes to see if the creature returned. If it didn't, I'd quickly grab my stuff and get the hell out of there. Those 15 minutes were the longest of my life. Every shadow looked like a massive figure. Every sound, and there weren't many in that unnatural silence, made me flinch. I kept the headlamp on, pointed out the window toward my tripod and camera, which now seemed like ridiculous things to risk my life for. When nothing happened, I finally worked up the courage to dash out, grab my equipment, and throw it haphazardly into the back seat. I didn't bother packing properly. I just yanked my camera off the tripod, collapsed the tripod with none of my usual care, and snatched up my chair and backpack. The whole retrieval took maybe 20 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. As I was starting the car, my headlights swept across the clearing, and for a split second I thought I saw movement at the tree line again. My heart nearly stopped. I threw the car into reverse, spun around on that dirt clearing, and drove away as fast as I safely could on that rough road. I didn't slow down until I hit pavement again. I didn't sleep at all that night. When I got home around 3 in the morning, I immediately started researching what I might have seen. I looked up black bears, elk, moose, anything that could explain what I'd encountered. Nothing fit. The creature had been too tall, too broad, too human-like in its proportions, yet completely inhuman at the same time. Eventually, my searches led me to stories of Bigfoot and Sasquatch sightings in the Olympic Peninsula. I've never been one to believe in cryptids or monsters. I've always thought those stories were just misidentifications or hoaxes. But now, I don't know what to believe. I've gone through the photos I took that night dozens of times, hoping to find some evidence of what I saw. There's nothing. Whatever it was, it stayed just outside the frame of my camera, as if it knew exactly what I was doing and how to avoid being captured. I still go out for night photography. I still love astrophotography. But I never go alone anymore, and I've never gone back to that ridge. Sometimes when I'm setting up my tripod, even in places close to civilization, I find myself scanning the tree line, looking for that massive silhouette. I keep thinking about how it just watched me, how it could have easily approached but chose not to. What was it doing out there, all alone in the darkness? Was it as surprised to see me as I was to see it? Did it feel the same fear I did? Or was it simply curious about this strange human pointing a machine at the stars? I don't have answers, just questions that keep me up at night. All I know is that something impossible watched me from the edge of that clearing, and I'll never forget the feeling of its eyes on me, or the impossible silence of its departure. Story 11. I've been debating whether to share this for almost 10 years now. I'm not a guy who believes in monsters or spends time on weird conspiracy websites. I'm a normal dude from Missouri who works construction, hunts, fishes, and minds my own business. But what happened that morning in 2014 has haunted me ever since, and I need to get it off my chest. My brother Thomas and I have been turkey hunting together since we were teenagers. It's our thing. Wake up way too early, freeze our asses off, and maybe bag a bird if we're lucky. That spring morning was supposed to be just another hunt at Hartsburg Conservation Area near Boone. We'd been going there for years and knew the place like the back of our hands. We left our place around 5:30 in the morning. It was that perfect kind of hunting weather. Cold enough to see your breath, but not so cold your fingers go numb. The forecast said it might warm up later, but for now, it was frigid. I remember because I was bitching about having to wake up so early while Thomas just sipped his coffee and ignored me like he always does. My brother's the quiet one. I'm the one who can't shut up. It had been raining for days before our trip. The Missouri River was running high and fast. We'd checked the water levels the night before and almost cancelled because of it. But the rain had finally stopped, and we figured we'd make the best of it. The roads were still wet though, and my old Ford pickup kept sliding a bit on the gravel as we made our way toward Cooper's Landing. The mist that morning was something else. It wasn't just foggy, it was like driving through clouds that had fallen from the sky and gotten tangled in the trees. Our headlights barely cut through it, creating this weird tunnel effect where you could only see maybe 30 feet ahead. We had the windows cracked despite the cold, because otherwise they'd fog up, and the smell of wet earth and river mud was thick in the air. We were on River Road, maybe 100 meters from Cooper's Landing, just chatting about nothing important. Thomas was saying something about work, and I was half listening while focusing on the road. The gravel was making that crunching sound under the tires, and the headlights were catching the mist in these weird ways, creating shadows where there shouldn't be any. That's when it happened. As we rounded a bend in the road, my headlights swept across the path ahead and caught something. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. There was this massive dark shape in mid-air, like it had just launched itself from the river onto the road about 30 meters in front of us. "Holy shit!" I remember yelling, and Thomas went completely silent. This thing landed on the road with a force I could almost feel through the truck. It was huge, not like bear huge, but impossibly tall and broad. The headlights illuminated it clearly for just a few seconds, but that image is burned into my memory forever. It was completely soaked, water cascading off it in sheets. The fur, yes, fur, was dark and matted, hanging in these twisted clumps. When it landed, water sprayed everywhere, glistening in our headlights. I instinctively hit the brakes, and the truck skidded slightly on the wet gravel. The creature never even looked our way. It landed in a crouch, and then in one fluid motion, and I mean one motion, it bounded across the road and up the bluff on the other side. This wasn't a gradual climb. That bluff is practically vertical in spots. I've hiked it before and had to use both hands and feet to scramble up. This thing scaled it like it was nothing, just powered up in what looked like 2 or 3 massive strides and disappeared over the top. Thomas and I sat there in complete silence for what felt like forever, but was probably just a minute. The truck idling, headlights pointing at the now empty road. I could hear my own breathing way too fast and feel my heart pounding in my chest. "Did you see that?" I finally managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant. Thomas just nodded, his face pale in the dim light of the dashboard. "What the fuck was that, Jackson?" I put the truck in park, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the shifter. We both just sat there, staring at the spot where it had been. I couldn't wrap my head around what we'd just witnessed. The size of it was what got me. Based on the trees and brush around where it climbed, that thing had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller, and the way it moved. Nothing that big should be able to move that gracefully. It was like watching a jungle cat, all power and precision, but scaled up to an impossible size. The river that morning was rough too, swollen with rainwater, churning with debris and strong currents. The fact that this thing had apparently been swimming in that, and then launched itself out with such force, it didn't make sense. After a few minutes, I put the truck back in drive, and we continued on, much slower now, both of us scanning the tree line like our lives depended on it. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? We both knew what we'd seen, but saying it out loud seemed crazy. We still went hunting that morning, but our hearts weren't in it. We spent more time looking over our shoulders than watching for turkeys. Every snap of a twig made us jump. The woods that had always felt like home suddenly felt alien and threatening. I kept thinking I was catching glimpses of something dark moving between the trees, but it was probably just my imagination working overtime. Around noon, we gave up and headed back home. The drive back was mostly silent. Finally, as we got close to our place, Thomas spoke up. "We're not telling anyone about this," he said flatly. Part of me wanted to argue, but he was right. Who would believe us? We'd sound like a couple of drunk idiots making up stories. Or worse, people would think we were seeking attention. So we agreed to keep it between us. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that thing in my mind, the way it moved, the water spraying off its body, the sheer impossible size of it. I tried to convince myself it was a bear, but I've seen plenty of bears while hunting. This wasn't a bear. The proportions were all wrong. It was bipedal, with long arms and legs. The silhouette was unmistakably humanoid, but no human could do what it did. Over the next few weeks, I found myself researching online, looking up wildlife in Missouri, reading about unusual animal sightings. Eventually, I ended up on websites I'd always laughed at before. Sites about Bigfoot and Sasquatch. I felt ridiculous, but the descriptions matched too closely to ignore. The height, the agility, the dark fur, it all fit. Thomas and I have talked about it over the years, usually after a few beers when our guard is down. Neither of us has changed our story or our certainty about what we saw. Sometimes I catch him staring into the distance, and I know he's thinking about it too. We've told a few family members. My wife knows, and so does our cousin who hunts with us sometimes. They humor us, but I can tell they don't really believe it. I don't blame them. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. I've been back to that spot on River Road dozens of times since then, always in daylight, always with a sick feeling in my stomach. The bluff is still there, still impossibly steep. I've tried to climb it myself a few times, just to see if what I witnessed was even physically possible. It's not, at least not for a human. It takes me several minutes of careful climbing to get up what that creature scaled in seconds. The river there is deep and fast. Swimming across it would be challenging for an Olympic athlete, let alone doing it and then making that leap. Whatever we saw that morning wasn't bound by normal physical limitations. What bothers me most isn't just what we saw, but how it's changed me. I used to feel at home in the woods. Now, especially at dawn or dusk, I feel watched. Every time I'm alone in the forest, I catch myself scanning the tree line, looking for movement that doesn't belong. I've woken up in a cold sweat more times than I can count, dreaming about that dark shape flying through the air. Thomas has changed too. He hunts less now, makes excuses when I suggest trips to Hartsburg. When we do go out, he's jumpy, hyper-aware. Neither of us goes anywhere near River Road before sunrise anymore. I've tried to find others who might have seen something similar in the area. There are whispers, stories, told by old-timers about strange encounters in those woods. Nothing recent, nothing concrete, but enough to make me wonder how many others have seen what we saw and, like us, kept quiet for fear of ridicule. The rational part of my brain still tries to explain it away. Maybe it was some kind of optical illusion created by the mist and the headlights. Maybe it was a bear that looked bigger because of the poor visibility. Maybe we both experienced some kind of shared hallucination. But then, I remember the sound it made when it landed on that gravel road. Not just the noise, but the way I felt the impact. The way the water sprayed off its fur in our headlights. The impossible speed and grace as it scaled that bluff. Those aren't things you imagine or misinterpret. Those are things you see and feel and know are real, even when you wish they weren't. I don't know what we saw that morning in 2014. I don't know if it was what people call Bigfoot or Sasquatch, or if it was something else entirely. What I do know is that it changed how I see the world. It opened up a possibility that there are things out there we don't understand, things that exist in the shadows just beyond our everyday perception. Sometimes, when I'm driving on a misty morning and the headlights catch the fog just right, I get this feeling in my gut, this certainty that if I just rounded the next bend at the right moment, I'd see it again. And I'm not sure if that feeling is hope or fear. Story 12. I never thought I'd be writing something like this. I'm not someone who scares easily. After 22 years in special forces, operating in some of the most hostile environments across the globe, I've seen things that would make most people's skin crawl. I've been shot at, nearly blown up more times than I can count, and spent weeks in complete darkness behind enemy lines. None of that prepared me for what I saw 5 months ago. When I retired in late 2021, I wanted nothing more than peace and quiet. I found exactly what I was looking for in southern Oregon, near the Klamath Basin. It's remote enough that I don't have to deal with neighbors too close by, but not so isolated that I can't get supplies when needed. I purchased nearly 40 acres of beautiful wooded land with a small cabin that I've been renovating. After over a year living here, I'd gotten to know every inch of my property. The wildlife patterns, the changing sounds through the seasons, the way light filters through the trees at different times of day. I'm telling you this so you understand that I'm not some city slicker who got spooked by a deer or a shadow. I know what belongs in these woods and what doesn't. It happened on February 23rd, 2023, a Thursday morning. I remember because I'd made a supply run into town the day before, but forgot the damn coffee filters of all things. I headed out early, around 6:30 in the morning, to grab them before starting my day. The local store opens at 7, and I like to get there right when they unlock the doors. The drive back was uneventful. It was about 7:30, and the morning light was soft and even, no harsh shadows, no fog, just clear visibility. I was approaching the unpaved connector road that leads to my driveway, a gravel road about 20 feet wide that cuts through dense forest. I always slow down here to check for traffic before crossing. That's when I saw it. At first, my brain tried to process what I was seeing as a person walking up from the bottom slope, crossing the road from left to right. But within a split second, I knew that wasn't right, not even close. For 4, maybe 5 seconds, I watched as this figure crossed the entire width of the road in just 4 heavy, deliberate strides. 4 strides to cover 20 feet. Each step seemed to shake the ground, though I couldn't feel it from inside my truck. With each movement, I could see the muscles flexing and shifting across its shoulders and back, twisting and working in a way that seemed both familiar and completely foreign. The thing was uniformly dark, either black or a deep charcoal color, and appeared to be covered in hair or fur. It wasn't like someone wearing a costume or layers of clothing. There were no visible seams, no clothing lines, no reflective materials, just a massive, upright form moving with surprising fluidity for something so clearly heavy. I've seen bears in these woods before. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that. This thing was walking upright with a strange swinging gait I've never seen in any animal or human. After it crossed the road, it disappeared into the thick timber that flanks both sides. I sat there for what felt like forever, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The coffee filters I'd just purchased lay forgotten on the passenger seat. When I finally got my shit together, I drove back to the intersection, hoping to catch another glimpse or find some evidence of what I'd just witnessed. There was nothing. No footprints in the gravel, no broken branches. No sign that anything had passed through at all. The area doesn't offer many hiding places, just dense forest and the slope leading down toward a creek that feeds into a man-made pond about 2 miles away. As I was standing there, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, my neighbor Tom drove by in his Subaru Forester. That's when it hit me just how big this thing had been. The Forester stands about 5 feet high, give or take, and this creature had been significantly taller than that, probably twice as wide too. I didn't tell Tom what I'd seen. What would I say? Hey, just saw Bigfoot cross the road. I'm not looking to become the local nut job. Instead, later that day, I asked my friend Thomas to help me with an experiment. Thomas is a big guy, 6'1" and about 275, former linebacker build. I had him walk across that same stretch of road while I watched from my truck, positioned exactly where I'd been that morning. Thomas took 8 steps to cover what that thing had crossed in just 4. 8 steps from a man who's no slouch in the stride department. And unlike the creature, I could clearly see Thomas's clothing details, the color of his skin, the normal proportions of a human being. The thing I saw had unusually long arms that hung almost to its knees and moved with a distinctly non-human swing. Most remarkable was its flat-footed walking style, stomping through with weight and deliberation rather than the typical heel-to-toe human gait. Each footfall seemed purposeful, almost like it was trying to be quiet, but couldn't quite manage it due to its sheer mass. After Thomas left, I grabbed a tape measure and went back to the road. Using the trees and brush as reference points, I tried to calculate the height of what I'd seen. Based on careful measurements and eye-level estimates, I'm certain this thing stood at least 8 feet 7 inches tall, with shoulders nearly 3 feet wide. And that might be conservative if it was hunched over, which it appeared to be. I've spent countless hours since that morning trying to rationalize what I saw. Was it a person in some elaborate costume? No way. The movements were too fluid, too natural for its body type. Was it a known animal? Nothing that size exists in these woods, at least nothing officially documented. Was I hallucinating? I hadn't been drinking, wasn't on any medication, and have never experienced hallucinations before. The truth is, I don't know what I saw, but I know what I saw, if that makes any sense. It's been 5 months now, and I haven't encountered it again. I still explore my property during daylight hours, but I'm constantly scanning the tree line, watching for movement that doesn't belong. And those nighttime walks I used to take without a flashlight. Yeah, those stopped the day after my encounter. I'm not afraid of the dark, never have been, but I'm not stupid either. Sometimes at night I'll be sitting on my porch with a beer and I'll get this feeling like I'm being watched. The forest will go quiet. No crickets, no frogs, no nocturnal birds. Just silence. And I'll remember those 4 heavy strides across 20 feet of gravel road. I've spent my entire adult life in situations where awareness meant survival. I've tracked targets through jungles and deserts. I've hunted and been hunted. But now, for the first time, I feel like I might be sharing my 40 acres with something that's better at this game than I am. Something that might be watching me right now as I type this. Last week, I found strange hair caught on a barbed wire fence at the far edge of my property. It was dark, coarse, and about 8 inches long, not matching any animal I know of in these parts. I've got it in a Ziploc bag, but haven't shown it to anyone. What would be the point? They'd think I was crazy. I don't know if I'll ever see this thing again. Part of me hopes I don't. But another part, the part that spent 2 decades facing the unknown, wants answers. What was it? Where did it come from? Is it still here, moving silently through my woods when I'm not looking? All I know for certain is this. Something crossed that road in February that shouldn't exist according to what we think we know about the natural world. It moved with purpose and intelligence, and now I can't shake the feeling that while I've been watching the forest these past 5 months, the forest, or something in it, has been watching me back. I keep my sidearm closer these days, not because I plan to use it, hell, I don't even know if it would do any good, but because for the first time since leaving the service, I feel like I might need it. Not for protection from people or known predators, but from something I can't explain. Something that took 4 strides to cross 20 feet of road and disappeared without a trace. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm just putting this out there because I need to tell someone, and this seems like the place where people might at least listen without immediately dismissing me as insane. All I know is that whatever I saw that February morning has changed me. After everything I've been through, all the combat zones and close calls, it took a 4-second encounter on a quiet Oregon morning to make me realize how little I actually know about the world around me. Story 13. This is going to be a long one, but I need to get this off my chest. It's been 3 months since my son Ethan and I went backpacking in Algonquin Park, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about what happened that night. We'd been planning this father-son trip for months. Ethan's 15, getting to that age where he doesn't want to hang out with his old man much anymore, so I figured 9 days in the backcountry would give us some solid bonding time. I've been camping my whole life, spent countless weekends in Algonquin over the years, so I knew what I was doing. We picked the Rain Lake access point near Kearney, not as crowded as some of the more popular entry points, but still well-maintained trails with decent campsites. The day started perfectly. We got to the access point around noon, got our permits sorted, and hit the trail by 1 in the afternoon. Weather was ideal. Sunny around 70 degrees, light breeze keeping the mosquitoes down. The first day's hike wasn't too strenuous, maybe 4 miles to our first campsite. We took our time, Ethan stopping occasionally to take photos of weird mushrooms or interesting rocks. The kid's into geology, so the Canadian Shield rock formations were like Disney World to him. We reached our site around 4:30. It was a beauty, right on a small bay with a little peninsula jutting out into the water. Behind the site was dense forest, so thick you couldn't see more than 20 feet in. The trees were mostly old growth, massive pines and hemlocks that had probably been there for centuries. The site had a decent fire pit ringed with rocks, a flat area for our tents, and even a crude log bench someone had dragged over. We set up camp efficiently, got both tents up, filtered some water from the lake, gathered firewood. Ethan caught a couple smallmouth bass, which we cooked over the fire with some pre-packaged rice I'd brought along. Simple meal, but after a day of hiking it tasted amazing. We stayed up till around 10, watching the stars come out and talking about school, his friends, normal stuff. It felt good, you know, just me and my boy connecting. Ethan crashed first. The hiking had worn him out. I stayed up another half hour or so, banking the fire and making sure our food was properly hung in a tree away from the site. Basic precaution against bears, which are common enough in Algonquin, but rarely a problem if you're smart about food storage. I finally crawled into my tent around 10:30. I could hear Ethan snoring lightly in his tent a few feet away. I was tired, but not quite ready to sleep, so I was just lying there on my sleeping pad, reading a bit on my phone. I know, technology in the wilderness, but I had it on airplane mode and dim screen. That's when I noticed the silence. If you've spent any time camping, you know the forest is never truly quiet. There's always something, wind in the trees, insects buzzing, small animals rustling in the underbrush, the lap of water on the shore. But suddenly, everything just stopped, like someone had hit a mute button on the whole world. At first, I thought maybe I was just focusing too much on my reading and tuning everything out. I put my phone down and really listened. Nothing. Not a cricket, not a rustle, not even the sound of water on the shore just 20 feet away. The silence was so complete it felt physical, like a pressure against my eardrums. I checked the time. 11:17. I remember it exactly because I was staring at my phone when it happened. The vibration. It wasn't like an earthquake. I've felt those before during a trip to California. This was different. It was a single massive impact that traveled through the ground and straight into my body. I was lying on my sleeping pad, but it felt like someone had struck a giant gong, and I was lying on it. The weird part was that there was no sound with it, nothing in the air. Just this massive force transmitted directly through the earth into my bones. My whole body tensed up. I lay perfectly still, listening, waiting. And that's when the smell hit me. This awful, musty odor like a wet dog that's been rolling in something dead. It wasn't overwhelmingly strong, just present enough that I couldn't ignore it. But as quickly as it came, it faded away. I don't know how long I lay there frozen. Could have been minutes, could have been an hour. I was literally afraid to move. Something about that vibration felt purposeful, like it was a footstep, but not from any animal I knew. Nothing that size should exist in Ontario woods. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep from pure exhaustion. When I woke up, sunlight was filtering through the tent walls. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd dreamed the whole thing, stress or something. But then I remembered that smell and the way the vibration had resonated through my entire body, and I knew it had been real. I unzipped my tent and stepped out. The morning was perfectly normal. Birds singing, slight breeze, sun glinting off the lake. Ethan was already up, boiling water on our little camp stove for oatmeal. "Morning, Dad," he said, looking completely normal. "Sleep okay?" I hesitated. "Did you hear anything weird last night?" He shook his head. "Nope. Crashed hard." "Why? Did something happen?" I told him what I'd experienced. The silence, the vibration, the smell. To his credit, he didn't laugh, or, "You tell me I was crazy." He just looked thoughtful. "Maybe it was a moose," he suggested. "They can get pretty big." But we both knew that wasn't it. A moose walking through camp would make noise in the air, not just vibrations through the ground. And they don't smell like wet dog. After breakfast, I suggested we explore around our campsite a bit. I told Ethan it was to gather more firewood, but really, I needed to see if there was any evidence of whatever had happened. The first thing we noticed was how the ground was structured. The soil was incredibly thin in places, just a couple inches of dirt and pine needles over solid Canadian shield rock. Ethan got excited about this, explaining how the rock could transmit vibrations really efficiently, like a natural soundboard. We experimented, jumping, stomping, even running across different areas. but nothing we did could reproduce anything close to the amplitude of what I'd felt the night before. Then we found the path. It wasn't on any map, wasn't a designated trail. It was just a trampled area where something had pushed through the underbrush, leading from the main trail toward our campsite. The vegetation was crushed rather than cut or cleared. Neither of us had walked that way. We'd approached the site from a different direction entirely. "Dad?" Ethan's voice had a strange quality I'd never heard before. He was about 20 feet away, staring up at something. It was a tree, a healthy pine about 8 inches in diameter. It had been snapped off about 6 feet above the ground, not cut with a saw, not chewed by a beaver. Snapped clean through with fresh splinters still visible on the break. The top of the tree, which should have been at least another 30 feet of pine, was just gone. Not fallen nearby, not dragged away that we could see. Just gone. We both stood there staring at it. Something with enough strength to snap an 8-inch pine like a toothpick and tall enough to do it 6 feet off the ground. "We should go," Ethan said quietly. I wanted to. Every instinct was screaming at me to pack up and hike out immediately, but it was already mid-morning and Rain Lake is pretty remote. We wouldn't make it back to the access point before dark. "We'll leave first thing tomorrow," I promised. "One more night." That day dragged on forever. We tried to act normal, fished a little, swam in the lake, cooked dinner. But both of us kept looking over our shoulders, scanning the tree line. I caught Ethan taking photos of the broken tree and the trampled path. Evidence, I guess. For what? I'm not sure. Night fell. We built the fire bigger than necessary, neither of us wanting to admit we were trying to keep whatever it was away. We didn't talk much. Around 9, we both retreated to our tents, though I doubt either of us expected to sleep. I lay there, listening intently. The normal forest sounds had returned. Crickets chirping, the occasional splash of a fish jumping in the lake. I started to think maybe it had been a one-time thing. Maybe we were safe. Then, around midnight, I heard it. At first, I thought it was a loon. If you've ever been to northern lakes, you know that haunting, wavering call they make, but this was off. It wasn't quite a call or a howl. It was more like a hoot, but deeper and much, much louder than any owl I've ever heard. It seemed to come from across the lake, then moments later from somewhere to our right, as if whatever made it had moved impossibly fast. The sound repeated 3 times, then silence fell again. That same unnatural, complete absence of sound I'd experienced the night before. I held my breath, waiting for the vibration, the smell, but nothing came. I must have eventually drifted off, because the next thing I knew, Ethan was shaking me awake. It was barely dawn. "Dad, please," he whispered, "let's go now." We broke camp in record time, didn't even bother with breakfast. Just packed everything and hit the trail as the sun was coming up. We hiked out in about half the time it had taken us to hike in, barely speaking, just moving as fast as we could without running. When we reached the car, Ethan finally asked the question I'd been dreading. "What do you think it was?" I shook my head. "I don't know, buddy. I really don't." We abandoned the last 7 days of our trip, drove straight home. I told my wife we'd gotten bored, decided to come back early. I'm not sure Ethan's told any of his friends about it either. I've tried researching since then, looked into animals native to that area, geological phenomena that could cause ground vibrations, everything I could think of. Nothing fits. The park rangers I've subtly questioned just give me weird looks when I describe a hypothetical scenario like what we experienced. That broken tree haunts me. The way it was snapped off so high up, the missing top, and that sound, that deep, echoing hoot that seemed to jump across the lake in seconds. I've been camping all my life. I respect nature, understand its dangers. Bears, wolves, weather, those are normal risks you prepare for. But whatever was at Rain Lake that night wasn't something you can prepare for. It wasn't something that should exist. I don't know if I'll ever go back to Algonquin. Ethan definitely won't. He's made that clear. Sometimes I catch him looking at those photos he took of the broken tree, zooming in on the splinters, the clean snap that nothing natural should have been able to create. What was it? What walked up to our camp that night, making the ground shake with each step? What hooted across the lake and then, impossibly quickly, from the forest beside us? I don't have answers. Just the memory of that vibration coming up through the earth into my body. And sometimes, when the wind is right, I swear I catch a whiff of that same musty wet dog smell, even here at home, hundreds of miles away from Rain Lake. Story 14. I still can't believe what happened last week. My hands are shaking just typing this out, but I need to tell someone who might actually believe me. It was around 8:30 in the evening when my brother Tyler called me. I was watching some stupid reality show and half dozing on the couch when my phone buzzed. Tyler sounded embarrassed. He'd run out of gas just 3 blocks from our house. Classic Tyler move. He's always pushing it with the gas gauge. I know it's stupid, but can you bring me the gas can from the garage? I'm stuck near Miller Creek. I groaned but agreed. Our parents were out of town visiting our aunt in Portland, so it was just us for the weekend. I grabbed the red plastic gas can from the garage, thankfully Dad keeps it filled, threw on my hoodie and headed out into the evening air. It was that weird time between day and night. Not quite dark yet, but the shadows were getting longer and deeper. Coos Bay gets like that in the fall, foggy, damp, with this heavy feeling in the air. Usually I don't mind walking around our neighborhood, even at dusk. It's a quiet town where nothing ever really happens. The gas can was heavier than I expected, and I had to switch hands every few minutes as I made my way down Spruce Street toward where Tyler said he'd stopped. The temperature had dropped pretty quickly after sunset, and I was already regretting not grabbing gloves. I spotted Tyler's beat-up Honda Civic right where the road curves near Miller Creek. He was standing outside the car, which was weird. If it was just a gas issue, why wasn't he sitting inside with the heater running? As I got closer, I noticed how he was standing, all tense, staring toward the creek bed like he was watching for something. "Hey!" I called out. "Got your gas?" Tyler jumped when I spoke. Actually jumped like I'd scared him badly. His face looked pale even in the dim light. "Jesus, Emma," he hissed. "Don't shout." I rolled my eyes. "What's your problem? It's not like I'm going to wake the neighbors from all the way out here." That's when I noticed Tyler kept glancing toward the thick mass of bushes and reeds that lined the creek. The creek itself isn't much, just a narrow waterway that swells during rainy season and shrinks to almost nothing during summer. But the vegetation around it is dense and wild, full of blackberry brambles and tall reeds. "Something's moving in there," he said quietly, nodding toward the creek bed. "I've been hearing it since I pulled over." I was about to make some smart remark about raccoons when a smell hit me. At first I thought maybe a septic tank had backed up somewhere nearby. It was foul, like rotting meat and something else I couldn't place, kind of like wet dog, but much, much worse. "Do you smell that?" Tyler asked, his voice tight. I nodded, suddenly not feeling like joking anymore. The smell was getting stronger, and now I could hear something too, a heavy rustling in the brush, like something big was moving through it. Not small like a raccoon or possum, something substantial. "Probably just a deer," I said, trying to convince myself more than Tyler. "But deer don't smell like that, and they usually move more gracefully through brush." Tyler grabbed the gas can from my hand. "Let's just fill this up and get out of here." He quickly unscrewed the gas cap and started pouring. I kept staring toward the creek, straining to see through the gathering darkness. The rustling had stopped, but I could feel something watching us. It's hard to explain, but you know that feeling when someone's staring at you. It was like that, but 100 times more intense. The gas can made gurgling noises as Tyler emptied it into his tank. His hands were shaking so badly he spilled some on the ground. The sharp smell of gasoline temporarily cut through the putrid odor from the creek, but only for a moment. Then the rustling started again, closer this time. I heard branches, snapping, not small twigs, but thicker branches that would take significant weight to break. Whatever was moving through that brush was heavy. "Tyler," I whispered, "hurry up." He'd just finished and was screwing the gas cap back on when he suddenly froze. His eyes widened, fixed on something behind me, toward the creek. The look on his face, I'll never forget it. Pure terror. Not fear, not concern. Absolute terror. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist so hard it hurt. "We need to go, now." His voice was barely audible, tight with panic. He yanked me toward him, almost making me lose my balance. The empty gas can clattered to the pavement as Tyler pulled me away from the car. "What about your car?" I asked. "Leave it," he hissed. "Just walk. Don't run yet. Don't look back." We started walking quickly toward our house, Tyler's fingers digging into my arm. The smell was overwhelming now, making my eyes water. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. After we'd gone maybe 20 feet, curiosity got the better of me. I had to know what Tyler had seen. I turned to look over my shoulder. That's when I saw it. At first, all I registered was a massive dark shape emerging from the creek bed. It was huge, easily 6 or 7 feet tall, and covered in dark hair or fur that seemed to absorb what little light was left. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand that tall or move like that. This thing was walking upright, but not like a human. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, broader than any person I've ever seen. The way it moved was wrong. Each stride covered too much ground, too efficiently. "Run!" Tyler screamed, abandoning all pretense of calm. We both took off, sprinting down the street toward our house. I've never run so fast in my life. My lungs were burning after just a few seconds, but pure adrenaline kept me going. I could hear heavy footsteps behind us, not right on our heels, but not far enough away to feel safe. The 3 blocks to our house suddenly seemed like miles. We tore down Spruce Street, past darkened houses where people were inside, completely unaware of what was happening just outside their doors. I wanted to scream for help, but I couldn't get enough air to do anything but run. I risked another glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing was following us, moving with this terrible fluid grace that didn't seem possible for something so large. It wasn't running all out. It was almost like it was pacing us, keeping a consistent distance. We were about a block from our house when headlights appeared ahead. A car turning onto Spruce Street. The approaching vehicle's lights swept across the road, briefly illuminating everything in harsh white light. In that flash of brightness, I got my clearest look at what was chasing us. The creature darted sideways, away from the light, into the vegetation along the north side of the road. But not before I saw its massive silhouette, the hulking shoulders, the long arms, the way it moved with this horrible agility for something so big. The car passed us, the driver completely oblivious to what was happening. Tyler and I didn't stop running until we reached our driveway. We stumbled up to the front door, Tyler fumbling with his keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the door. We practically fell inside, slamming the door behind us and locking it immediately. We collapsed in the entryway, gasping for breath. For several minutes, neither of us could speak. My legs were trembling so badly I couldn't stand. Tyler crawled to the window and peeked through the blinds, checking to see if the thing had followed us all the way home. "Do you see anything?" I finally managed to ask between gasps. Tyler shook his head, but he didn't look relieved. "What the hell was that, Emma?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I knew what we'd seen, even though my brain was desperately trying to come up with rational explanations. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't run on 2 legs like that. It wasn't a person in a costume. No costume could replicate that fluid movement, that impossible frame. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist, but clearly did. We spent the rest of the night with all the lights on, jumping at every sound outside. Tyler slept on the couch in the living room because neither of us wanted to be alone. We didn't talk much about what we'd seen. It was like putting it into words would make it more real somehow. The next morning, Tyler insisted on going back for his car in broad daylight. I went with him because there was no way he was going alone, and there was no way I was staying in the house by myself. We took my car, pulled up next to his, and he transferred the gas can. While he was filling up his tank again, I gathered my courage and walked to the edge of the road, looking down toward the creek bed. The brush was trampled in places, with broken branches and flattened reeds, creating a clear path, a path made by something large moving through at speed. There were indentations in the soft ground that might have been footprints, but rain overnight had partially filled them with water, obscuring any details. The smell was still there, though fainter in the morning air. It's been a week now, and I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I can hear those heavy footsteps outside my window. Tyler's barely sleeping. He says he keeps seeing movement in the tree line behind our house at dusk. We haven't told anyone else what we saw. Who would believe us? But I know what we encountered that night. Everyone around here has heard the stories about Bigfoot sightings in the forests around Coos Bay. I always thought they were just local legends, campfire stories meant to scare tourists and kids. I don't think that anymore. I know what we saw was real. It was there, it chased us, and worst of all, it seemed intelligent. It didn't run at us with mindless aggression. It followed us, paced us, like it was studying us or maybe even herding us. I've started researching similar encounters in the area. There are more than I expected, dating back decades. Most happened in more remote areas around Coos Bay, not right in town like ours. That's what scares me the most. Whatever this thing is, it's getting bolder, coming closer to where people live. Tyler and I have made a pact not to go out alone after dark anymore. We've also agreed not to tell our parents. They'd either think we were making it up or they'd worry themselves sick. But I needed to tell someone, anyone who might understand or have experienced something similar. I keep telling myself that it didn't hurt us when it clearly could have. It had every opportunity to catch us if it wanted to. But that's not as comforting as it should be, because now I can't stop wondering, what did it want? And will it come back? Story 15. I still get chills thinking about what happened last fall in the Utah mountains. I've been hunting my whole life, grew up with a rifle in my hand since I was 12, but nothing prepared me for those two experiences. I'm not the type to believe in the supernatural or monsters in the woods. I've always been pretty level-headed. My wife jokes that I'm too practical, that I can't enjoy scary movies because I'm always pointing out what the characters should have done differently. But what happened out there, I can't explain it, and it's been keeping me up at night. The first incident happened in early October when I was out with Jake, this hunting guide who's been working the area for almost 20 years. The guy knows those mountains better than he knows his own living room. We were scouting for elk in this dense patch of forest about 15 miles outside of Monroe. It was around 4 in the afternoon, and we'd been hiking for most of the day without much luck. The forest was thick there, lots of pine and aspen with undergrowth that made moving quietly a real challenge. It was one of those perfect fall days, temperature in the low 50s, clear sky. The kind of day that reminds you why you love being outdoors. We'd been walking for maybe 30 minutes in comfortable silence when I first heard it. A distinct knocking sound, like someone tapping a stick against a tree trunk. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from ground level, maybe 50 yards to our right. I glanced at Jake, and he had already stopped, head tilted, listening. "You hear that?" I whispered. He nodded slowly, brow furrowed. The knocking continued, steady and rhythmic. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. Too consistent to be branches falling or animals moving around. We stood there for a good minute just listening. Then Jake whispered, "Let's keep moving, but quietly." As we started walking again, the knocking followed us. It maintained the same distance, always to our right, always the same pattern. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. What made it truly unsettling was how it matched our pace. When we sped up, the intervals between knock sequences shortened. When we slowed down, so did the knocking. After about 10 minutes of this, I could tell Jake was getting seriously uncomfortable. I'd hired him specifically because locals said he was unflappable, the kind of guide who'd seen everything these mountains could throw at you. But his face had gone pale, and he kept scanning the tree line. "What is that?" I finally asked, keeping my voice low. Jake shook his head. "I've never heard anything like it before," he admitted. "Not in 20 years out here." That's when my stomach really dropped. If this veteran guide was spooked, I knew we were dealing with something unusual. The knocking continued for another 15 minutes as we made our way through the forest. It never got closer, never revealed its source. Just that steady, deliberate rhythm that seemed almost intelligent, like it was trying to communicate something. Eventually, we reached a clearing, and the knocking stopped. Just like that. We waited for a few minutes, but it was gone. Jake suggested we head back to the truck, and I didn't argue. Neither of us wanted to be in those woods when the sun went down. On the drive back, Jake was quieter than usual. When I pressed him about what we'd heard, he just shrugged and said, "Some things in these mountains don't have explanations, Mason." I tried to convince myself it was just some weird natural phenomenon, or maybe another hunter playing tricks. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever made those sounds was following us deliberately. I didn't go back to that specific area again, but about 2 weeks later, I was back in the same mountain range, this time with my father-in-law, Bill. We were about 2 miles from where the knocking incident had happened, up on Mount Monroe proper, scouting for elk again before the season opened. It was mid-morning, around 10 o'clock. The weather had turned colder, and there was a light dusting of early snow on the higher elevations. We'd separated briefly. Bill was checking a ravine about a quarter-mile away, while I glassed a ridgeline for movement. That's when I spotted a mountain goat moving along the rocks above me. I'm not sure why, but something about this goat caught my attention. It moved with purpose, almost like it wanted me to see it. I decided to follow, just out of curiosity. I tracked it for maybe 5 minutes, climbing higher up the rocky slope. Then it disappeared around an outcropping. When I reached the spot where I'd last seen it, the goat was nowhere in sight. It was odd. There wasn't really anywhere it could have gone that quickly. I was about to turn back when something caught my eye further along the ridgeline. Maybe 300 yards away, 2 figures walking slowly in the opposite direction. My first thought was other hunters, but something felt off immediately. They were moving in a way that seemed unnatural, not quite fluid. The taller one had to be at least 7 feet, with the shorter one maybe 5.5 feet tall. Both were dark, almost black in color, and they weren't wearing the bright orange or camo you'd expect from hunters. I raised my binoculars to get a better look, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Their proportions were wrong. The arms too long, the gait too stiff, yet somehow graceful. They moved silently across the rocky terrain that should have made noise under any normal footsteps. I lowered the binoculars, heart pounding in my chest. These weren't people. I don't know what they were, but they weren't human. Every instinct in my body was screaming danger. I fumbled for my radio to call Bill, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. "Bill," I whispered urgently, "I need you to come up to my position, now." He must have heard the fear in my voice because he didn't ask questions, just said he was on his way. I looked back at the ridge, and the figures were gone, just disappeared in the few seconds I'd looked away. I scanned the whole area, but there was nothing moving anywhere on that exposed ridgeline. When Bill arrived about 10 minutes later, I was still staring at the spot where I'd seen them. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, slightly out of breath from climbing up to me. "I saw something. Someone," I managed. 2 figures walking along that ridge over there. Bill squinted in the direction I was pointing. I don't see anything. They're gone now, but they were there a few minutes ago. I want to check it out. He looked skeptical but followed as I made my way toward the ridge. It took us about 20 minutes to reach the area where I'd spotted the figures. The ridge was bare rock with patches of snow. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to disappear to, except straight down a nearly vertical drop of several hundred feet. We searched the area carefully. That's when we found them, tracks in the light snow. 2 sets, one much larger than the other. They weren't boot prints or animal tracks. They were, I don't even know how to describe them, elongated, with what looked like 5 distinct toe impressions, but all wrong somehow. They walked precisely in line, never deviating, straight as an arrow. And then they just stopped, right at the edge of the ridge, as if whatever made them had simply walked off the cliff, or vanished into thin air. Bill saw them too. He knelt down, touched one of the prints, then stood up quickly like it had burned him. "We should go," he said firmly. "Now." We didn't speak much on the way back to the truck. What was there to say? We'd both seen those tracks, ending impossibly at the edge of a cliff. That night at the motel, Bill finally broke the silence. "I've been hunting these mountains for 40 years, he said quietly. "Never seen anything like that before." "What do you think it was?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Don't know. Don't want to know." We cut our trip short and headed home the next day. I haven't been back to that part of Utah since, and I'm not sure I ever will. Something's out there in those mountains, something that knocks on trees and follows hunters, something that walks on 2 legs but isn't human. The thing that haunts me most is the purposefulness of it all. The knocking that followed our pace exactly, the way those figures moved with such deliberate steps, the tracks that led straight to a cliff edge and just stopped. None of it was random. All of it felt intelligent. I've tried researching similar experiences online, and there are stories out there, whispers about things in remote forests that don't match any known animal, but nothing quite like what we encountered. I still hunt, but I stick to familiar territory now, places close to home with lots of other people around, and I never go alone. Sometimes at night, I still hear that knocking in my dreams. 3 knocks. Pause, 3 knocks, like it's trying to tell me something or lure me back. Whatever's out there in those Utah mountains, I hope I never encounter it again. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Story 16. I've spent the last 15 years as an avid outdoorsman. Camping, hunting, fishing, you name it. Growing up in Minnesota, I was always comfortable in the woods. Or at least I was, until Memorial Day weekend, 2008. My buddy Tyler and I had planned a 3-day camping trip in the Black Hills National Forest of South Dakota. We'd both been there a couple times before with family, but this was our first trip there together, just the 2 of us, and Tyler's dog, Ranger, a German Shepherd mix who loved the outdoors as much as we did. We arrived Friday afternoon, drove about 2 hours into the forest on logging roads, and found this perfect little spot tucked away where nobody would bother us. It was pretty remote, exactly what we wanted. The site had this natural rock overhang that provided some shelter, with dense forest surrounding us on 3 sides and a small clearing in front where we set up our fire pit. The first night was completely normal. We drank a few beers, cooked some steaks over the fire, and talked about work and girls and all the usual crap. Nothing unusual at all. Ranger seemed totally at ease, which is always a good sign, since dogs tend to sense things before humans do. It was the second night when things started to get weird. We'd spent the day hiking and fishing at this little creek about a mile from camp, got back around 7, started drinking and goofing around like guys do when there's nobody around to judge them. At some point, must have been around 9 or 10, we started howling like wolves and making these stupid monkey noises, just laughing our asses off. We kept it up for maybe 15 minutes before settling down. about 20 minutes. After we quit with the animal noises, I heard this sound that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. It was like a tree snapping in half, followed by what I can only describe as a freight train crashing through the woods. The ground actually shook. I'm not exaggerating. It shook. Tyler and I looked at each other, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. We grabbed our flashlights and guns. We'd brought a 30-06 rifle and a 9mm pistol for protection and scanned the tree line. Nothing. We walked about 50 yards in the direction of the sound, but found absolutely nothing out of place. No broken trees, no disturbed ground, nothing. I remember thinking maybe a dead tree had fallen somewhere deeper in the forest, but it didn't explain the crashing sound that followed. We returned to camp, built the fire up higher, and tried to laugh it off. But I noticed Ranger was acting different, staying close to Tyler, ears perked up, occasionally growling softly at the darkness beyond our campsite. Around midnight, Tyler passed out in his sleeping bag under the rock overhang. I wasn't tired yet, so I stayed up, sitting by the fire with Ranger next to me. That's when I noticed one of the trees at the edge of our clearing, about 40 feet away, start to shake. Not like with a breeze. This was violent shaking, like something was pushing against it repeatedly. The tree was probably 8 inches thick at the base, not some sapling that would move in the wind. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the tree, expecting to see a bear or something. Nothing. The tree kept shaking for almost 20 minutes while I sat there, frozen, afraid to wake Tyler because I didn't want to sound crazy. Ranger was growling steadily now, hackles raised, staring at that same tree. Eventually the shaking stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking whatever it was had moved on. I scanned the woods with my flashlight one more time, sweeping from left to right across the tree line. That's when I saw them, 2 blue eyes reflecting my flashlight beam, about 8 feet off the ground and maybe 60 feet away. They weren't animal eyes, at least not like any I've ever seen. They were huge, like golf balls, and they didn't look away when my light hit them. They just stared back at me. I fumbled for the rifle, but by the time I had it in my hands and looked back up, the eyes were gone. I woke Tyler up then, told him what I'd seen. He looked at me like I was insane, but agreed to stay up with me for a while. Around 2 in the morning, we both heard heavy footsteps moving across the hill behind our camp. Slow, deliberate steps, followed by branches snapping. Tyler heard it too, so I knew I wasn't imagining things. The steps circled around to the left side of our campsite, staying just beyond where our firelight reached. What happened next is what really screwed me up. At around 3 a.m., something started making vocalizations from the left side of our camp. It wasn't an animal sound, at least not one I recognized. It was a deep, rough voice, almost like someone trying to talk with a mouth full of peanut butter. It sounded like it was saying, "Mark, rock, rock," over and over. I know how insane that sounds, but that's what it sounded like. Tyler heard it too. His face went white. The voice continued for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped. A few minutes later, we heard deep grunting sounds directly above our overhang. Whatever it was standing right above us. The smoke from our fire drifted up in that direction, and we heard what sounded like a loud sneeze, followed by coughing. Tyler and I were paralyzed with fear, clutching our guns, while Ranger cowered between us, whimpering. We didn't sleep at all that night. As soon as the sun came up, we debated whether to pack up and leave. Tyler wanted to go, but I convinced him to stay one more night. I told myself it was probably just some locals messing with us, though deep down I knew that wasn't true. The third night was the worst. As soon as it got dark, it started again, but different this time. Something was repeatedly crashing through the woods at incredible speed, making loops around our campsite. It sounded like a train moving through the trees. The force of it was knocking branches down. This went on for hours, starting and stopping, always staying just out of sight. Around midnight, Ranger started barking frantically at something in the darkness. Tyler had to physically restrain him from running into the woods. I got the distinct feeling that whatever was out there was trying to lure Ranger out for an easy meal. Neither of us slept that night either. We kept the fire blazing as high as we could, backs against the rock wall, guns ready. The crashing sounds continued intermittently until about 4 in the morning, when everything suddenly went quiet. When daylight finally came, we didn't waste any time. We packed up our gear in record time. Before leaving, I wanted to check the area where I'd seen the most activity. What I found still haunts me. About 50 yards from our camp, I found a tree, at least 12 feet tall, that had been snapped about 8 feet up and bent all the way to the ground. Not cut, not broken by wind, snapped clean with massive force and pushed down. The broken part was still partially attached. No animal I know could do that. The area around the tree had a strong smell, like rotting meat mixed with wet dog, and something musky I can't even describe. There were also what looked like tracks in the soft ground, not clear footprints, but depressions that showed something heavy had walked through. The stride between them was huge, at least 7 feet apart. In one spot where the ground was softer, I found what looked like a partial footprint. It had 5 wide toes and was much bigger than my boot. I tried to take a picture with my phone, but it was too vague to show up clearly. We got out of there as fast as we could. During the entire 2-hour drive back to the main road, we barely spoke. What could we say? Everything we thought we knew about the woods, about what exists in North America, had been shattered. I've spent hours researching what it might have been. Bigfoot? Maybe, but the blue eyes don't match most descriptions. Wendigo? Some other Native American legend come to life? I don't know. What I do know is that something intelligent was stalking us in the Black Hills that weekend, something that could mimic sounds, that knew we were vulnerable, and that seemed to be playing with us like a cat with mice. I haven't been camping since then. Tyler says he has, but never in remote places anymore. Ranger wouldn't go near the forest edge for months afterward. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear that voice again. Mark. Rock, rock. And I wonder if it was trying to say my name, if it knew who I was, if it's still out there, waiting for me to come back. Whatever stalks the Black Hills changed me forever. There are things in this world we don't understand, things that exist in the shadows of our so-called civilization. And sometimes, when we venture too far from the safety of our homes, they notice us. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't lived it. All I know is that I'm never going back to those woods again. Some places are better left alone.